What's good, Ivy Nation? Welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I'm Vince Siderio. That's Brian Driscoll. That is Trevor Trowbridge, and we are back for a great show. Frankly, we are continuing with our positional preview, and we are still on the defensive side of the football because there are more positions on defense than there are on offense. Position groups, I should say, and then we are going to roll into our next opponent preview, which is the Boston College Eagles. So we've got a lot in store for all of you today. It is Tuesday, July 22nd. How's everybody doing today, fellas?
I'm good. I'm ready to rock and roll. So it's been a interesting day over here, so I'm ready to talk some football.
There you go. Fair enough. Trev, how you hanging, man?
You guys know what it is. I'm always ready. I'm ready to dive into some safety talk.
There we go. So without further ado, let's jump into this safety group, guys. And, this is one of the more, we always talk about, okay, what position are you watching? What position battle are you paying attention to? All of those different things. And an easy answer to that question is the safety position. And it's the safety position, obviously, opposite Adon Shuler, because it is wide open and there are some very large shoes to fill in that spot with Xavier Watts taking his talents to the NFL. And, what is that going to look like? A lot of I would say steps forward last year in 2024, but then you lose an All-American like Xavier Watts. So can you continue that in 2025? I think, Brian, is a massive question for the group. Obviously, we're going to jump into the specifics individually and all those things. But as a group, can they maintain the level that they played at in 2024?
Well, and it's important because this is not a position that has been as consistently good the last few years as the cornerback position has been the last few years. And not that it's been bad. It wasn't bad in 2023. It just was inconsistent because after Xavier Watts, I mean, you've had that one stud the last few years. You had Kyle Hamilton in 2021. You had Xavier Watts really especially break out in 2023, but he was good in 2022. But he really broke out in 2023. The safety position in 2022 was a very shaky position for Notre Dame because Xavier was dealing with a lot of his adjustment to the position. And, you had DJ Brown as a top guy. I mean, DJ Brown was your fourth leading, tackler on that team. You played Houston Griffith. Brandon Joseph was expected to be this big pickup from the portal. He was a giant disappointment that season as a player, and it wasn't a strength. So the cornerback position had its moments that year, but overall, I mean, it was pretty good that year. Cam Hart started to emerge. Benjamin Morrison was a freshman All-American 2023. Xavier Watts breaks out. He's a stud. DJ Brown was solid, but he wasn't an impact guy. And then Ramon Henderson was really spotty as a rotation guy. Just great athlete, but just not a real instinctive football player. And that proved to be a big problem for that team. And we were, gosh, go back and look at the Ohio State game. Just two huge mistakes from the safety position on that final drive that allowed Ohio State to win the game. You have DJ Brown, who makes a great read, jumps the route, but then drops the interception. And then on the 3rd and long, Ramon Henderson's got his feet on the goal line, and he pedals into the end zone instead of squeezing down like DJ did on the other side. So, if you go back and look at that play and you watch what DJ did on the backside, if Ramon Henderson does exactly what DJ Brown did, that window's not there. He breaks it up. Maybe he intercepts the pass, and it's either Notre Dame ball or 4th and 23. And but he doesn't do it. And those things just happened way too much. There was a lot of missed tackles from the safety position. You fast forward to 2024, we knew that Xavier Watts was going to be really good. We didn't know what was going to happen other than that. Rod Hurd wasn't here in the spring. He was moving from nickel. You had Adon Shuler that we hoped could be good, but we hadn't seen him play meaningful down in football since high school. You didn't really know what to expect, and it was a strength of the defense from the jump of the season. I mean, Adon made his presence felt game one. We knew pretty early that Rod was going to be a solid backup player. Like Rod was as a backup what DJ Brown was as a starter the year before. And similar type of, not a difference maker, but he's going to do his job. And he was a very important pickup. So, you had sort of that position where, like, dude, this is a major strength of this defense. Now we're in a situation similar to where we were last year, but without the All-American returner. So we have expectations for Adon Shuler, but he's got to improve a lot. Where with Xavier Watts, it was like, dude, just do what you did last year and you'll be fine. Now it's like Adon, like, okay, if you do what you did last year, they'll be okay, but you don't have Xavier Watts complimenting you anymore. So ideally, you need to raise your game up, but then who's going to start next to you? And there's all these question marks. So while there's the potential for this unit to be as good or potentially better than it was a year ago as an entire unit, I don't see anybody being better than Xavier Watts individually, but as a unit better, there's that potential, but there's a lot of questions before they get to that point where the potential turns into production. And so and it's important because it's such an important part of this defense. This position is in the modern offense, and this is what trips me out about the NFL. Maybe it's not true in the NFL, but in college football, the safety position is incredibly important. And people devalue it. Oh, it's not a prime position like left tackle, quarterback. Well, maybe not. But in today's game, man, the safety position is vital. And we saw that last year where Notre Dame exposed some other team safeties. And we saw that at Notre Dame in recent years when the safety position hasn't been filled playmakers. And you have to think that if Adon Shuler or if Xavier Watts is robbing down into the hole in 2023, you're thinking he probably picks that ball off just because he made those plays. If Jadon Blair is rolling down in the hole, if Tay Johnson, you'd like to think athletically they make that play. They haven't proven that they can make that play, but it's such an important position in college football as a whole against the modern spread offenses. Safeties are put in so many challenging positions, but especially in the Notre Dame defense, it's a vitally important position. And if you're not good there, your defense can't be elite. And we have hope that it's going to be good, but as of right now, it's still a very unproven group.
So, Trevor, talking about being elite and talking about this position being elite, we like to talk about what was lost. And this is one of the biggest losses on the team, frankly, from all of the different things that Xavier Watts brought to the table. But, why is he such a big loss, not only to the team, but specifically to this position group, like what he brought to the table and whatnot?
I mean, it goes back to what Brian was talking about. And it goes back to going into 2024, we knew what to expect from zero on the back end of Notre Dame's defense. Now it's a little bit more of a question mark, but you look at everything that he brought to the table. And Irish Breakdown is currently rolling out their, impact players. Well, you want to talk about somebody that impacted the team in 2024 in multiple different ways, not just what his stat line was at the end of the season. That was Xavier Watts. And one of the bigger questions that we do have about this unit is how is the room going to be cohesively when kind of the glue of that room is now playing for the Atlanta Falcons? Last season, you look at what he meant to this defense. He was a leader. He was a playmaker. He was dependable. I'm sure everybody in this chat, anybody that's going to be listening to this on the podcast channel can go back and think of the number of times where Notre Dame's defense just kind of needed that stop and they needed to find a way to get the ball back. Who was always around the football? It was Xavier Watts. Even in some of the less flashy plays. Yes, you think back to, one of his 6 or 7 interceptions from 23 or 24. But I also think back to, plays against Georgia, where there was an end around. The entire defense was flowing right. There was one guy who read the play correctly and was there to make the stop so it wasn't a big gain, and that was Xavier Watts. Who steps up into that role? But, Brian, I think you hit the nail on the head. In the college level, safety is such a valued position. It really is. One, specifically in Notre Dame's defense, how much Mike Mickens puts emphasis on the safety position. You brought up the 2023 Ohio State game. Safeties had 2 chances to kind of put the nail in the coffin in that game, and unfortunately, for different reasons, wasn't able to happen. But they're kind of the last line of defense, kind of thus the name of what the position is that they're playing. But they're playmakers against the run. They have important coverage responsibilities. Xavier Watts didn't get 13 interceptions in 2 seasons just by always miraculously being in the right place at the right time. Yes, you had to do your job, but you had to read the offense correctly. You had to have a really deep understanding of what your assignment was. And then they're communicators on the back end of the defense. You can go back and look at the Texas A&M game. first game starting for a lot of people, including their middle linebacker. And Adon Shuler and Xavier Watts, more specifically, Xavier Watts was one of the people that was helping getting people lined up on the back end of the defense. It's something that they're going to have to find some way to replace this upcoming season.
It was interesting with Adon last year. We'd be sitting there in spring practice and in fall camp, and we're watching Adon like bark out signals and bark out communication to other players. Vince, there was a spring practice in the stadium, and a linebacker made a mistake, and I think it was one of the veterans. I think it was Jalen Sneed, and Adon Shuler comes screaming downhill like he's trying to fill the alley to make a tackle, and he comes up to Jalen Sneed and he's like barking at him, like not like you dumb, but just like, this is what dude, you gotta know what you're doing here. This is what you're supposed to do. Like, this is a redshirt freshman who's never played a meaningful down, because that's just who Adon was. Do they have anybody like that in this room? Because what made last year's room so good is it wasn't just Xavier that was doing that, Trev, to your point. It was both of them were that way. Well, we know that Adon's going to be that way, but will somebody else kind of step into that? That remains to be seen.
It does remain to be seen. And I think that's, one of the biggest question marks. And not only, who's going to start opposite of Adon Shuler and all of that, but, whoever it is, whether it's one guy, two guys, three guys, or rotate, whatever the case may be, do they have that leadership, capability? Do they have that,
right?
All of those things that Xavier Watts, like, again, it's like Moneyball, right? You don't have to replace the individual, but you got to at least replace him in the aggregate. You know what I mean? You can have multiple guys doing it, but you got to replace it somehow if you want to stay at that level.
Right. And it's also, okay, how much better does Adon get compared to what he was last year?
For sure.
And then how can they match that bar? And then can they be better off the bench? Can they be as good or better than Rod Hurd? How will they fit into the new system? And so those are things that we'll talk a little bit more about in the big question standpoint. But that's why the safety position, guys, to me, is one where if you take away your feelings about the talent in the room and look at what beyond the talent, because even the talent, we don't know that it's going to thrive at Notre Dame because it hasn't had a chance to do so yet. Take away the talent, you have to be willing to admit that there's a lot we don't know about this position group. But then when you start thinking about the talent, that's where you get fired up. And that's that really unique early pre-camp dichotomy you battle with, because you're like, I don't know this, I don't know that, I don't know that, I don't know this, but man, I love the talent in this room. And that's what starts getting you excited. It's like we're talking about all these, like, we don't know this, we don't know that, and and that, like, the show's kind of starting with like a, I don't know, and this is a concern, and then especially in part two of the show, when we start talking about the individual players, you're like, but Lord have mercy, there's a lot of talent in this room. There's a reason Kennedy or Lecker transferred, and it's not because Notre Dame didn't want to keep him. They liked Kennedy a lot. He's a talented football player. But he just looked at the room and was like, nope. Like, I'm already behind that guy, and this guy's passing me up already in spring practice. And, goodness gracious, it's a talented room.
Yeah.
Now we just got to see it kind of come together and play to their talent level.
Yeah. No, for sure. And it's so important that, like you said earlier, Brian, this safety position is so incredibly important for all of the reasons that both of you, listed out, specifically to Xavier Watts or generically to the position itself. It's incredibly important. I mean, for a myriad of reasons. And so they got to get this one right. And, obviously Mike Mickens is, for the second year in a row, is going to be in charge of the entire secondary with help from his friends. But, he is the buck stops with Mike Mickens, right? And we know he is extremely talented as a cornerback coach. We know he's an extremely talented coach, period, right? I feel like this is the first time at the safety position he's had a really big decision to make and kind of what that's going to look like. I'm kind of throwing you a curveball here a little bit, but
yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that, because I think we had a curveball last year. I mean, it may look back now like it was a no-brainer that Adon Shuler was going to start, but when we went into spring practice last year, that was by far a given. I mean, the expectation was that Rod Hurd was going to come in and be the starter at safety. And That's what they brought him in for. He was a guy that had 80-plus tackles the year before at Northwestern as their nickel. He had played 2,000 career snaps of football. He'd had some really impressive moments against some good teams, and it was like, well, Don's going to be the rotation, but how good is he going to be? I think there was even last year a little bit of a curveball last season in that regard. I think this year, Trev and Vince, it's more so. I don't know that it's less of a curve. I don't know if it's much as a curveball. Maybe, and Vince, if I'm not answering your question correctly, please follow up. But I don't know that it's a curveball. I think it's more of a, you guys know I love using movie quotes to because in my head I'm thinking this dramatic scene when I think about. You remember the scene in the first Godzilla where the Japanese scientist is talking to the admiral of it might have been a general of the army, as general of the army, and he goes, "Let them fight," and that's where Mike Mickens is dude, let them battle, let them fight, and the winner will emerge, and he's going to be really good because in order to emerge out of that room, you better be pretty good, if a guy's in a room and it's okay, y'all gonna battle, and whoever comes out of this room, and it's like Mike Tyson going against Urkel and Screech and people like that, and not Mike Tyson, it's or just some guy. You're well, I don't know how bad that guy really is because he beat up Urkel and Screech and these small guys to get there, but it's okay, if you're in a room and you got Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, you get out of that room that's a bad dude right there. And I think that's kind of where Mike Mickens is look, in order to win the starting job here, you better be pretty flipping good. And so then the question is, okay, well, who's gonna step up? Someone's got to start? Like we talked about quarterback, somebody's gonna start. But are you starting because you stunk the least of all the other guys that were battling for that position? Are you starting because of the three guys that were solid, you were the most solid? Or are you starting because you walked in that room and you're kaboom, guess who stepped in the room? This is my room. This is my position now. And I'm gonna prove it every single day. That's a different thing. So I think that's a question mark, but I don't know that's a curveball because I think that's exactly what Mike Mickens has been recruiting, the way he's been recruiting to get to that point where it's hey man, this is why I recruit all you guys. Who's gonna seize it, and then who's gonna say, okay, you may start, but I'm playing. You better play me not because I'm gonna transfer, but you better play me because have you seen what I've been doing in practice? Hey, you better play me too. Hold on, so coach, don't forget about me because I've been balling out too, and that's what Mike Mickens hopes happens because he'll only play 3 safeties if he has to, but I think he'd like to get to more than that, especially because this team has aspirations of playing more than 13 games this year. They have aspirations of playing 15, 16 games. And they understand we're gonna need that as we get through this thing. Did I answer that? Did I address that the way you wanted, Vince? Was it true to your question?
No, 100%. I just wanted to kind of put out there that Mike Mickens has a really tough choice because there's so much talent, essentially. You know what I mean? And I feel like you're right. Revisionist history, Adon Shuler was the obvious choice last year. And, maybe that wasn't the case a year ago today, now that I think back on it. And you're absolutely right. But, man, what a great choice. So
he made it the obvious choice in fall camp.
Yes, he did.
And that was the exciting thing about it.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't because Rod Hurd was disappointing. It wasn't because Rod Hurd wasn't as good as they hoped he was going to be. I think Rod Hurd was exactly what they hoped he would be. That's why they had no problem putting him in clutch situations like the 4th down throw in the goal, in the red zone against Georgia. It just was, that's how good Adon was. And where in the past it was well, that guy played because so-and-so was disappointing and didn't play well or whatever. It was more so, Rod Hurd was everything we hoped he would be. So was Adon.
Right.
and he was just a more talented player. So,
sure.
Yeah, I think that's what they're hoping for again this year.
Right. Absolutely. And there's the talent to talk about it. And we're going to get into these guys individually. But before we do, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and join us on the boards, the premium message boards, at boards@irishbreakdown.com. There's some great stuff over there. It's a nice film breakdown of Sullivan Absher, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And so you get a little game film in there and a little bit of breakdown. So you want to check that out as well. But you only get that if you're a premium message board subscriber. And that is boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's where you find it. All right, gentlemen. So let's kind of jump into this depth chart a little bit and talk about what options there are. And let's be honest. Let's start with the guy who there is no question as to who is going to start. And we've kind of hinted around at it a little bit and talked about him a little bit more. And that's obviously Adon Shuler. And look, Adon Shuler took a massive step forward last year and cemented himself in the defensive backfield for Notre Dame for the foreseeable future, specifically in 2025. And, you know, what he brings to the table, fellas, is, I mean, he's got to basically jump into the shoes of Xavier Watts from a leadership standpoint and then just advance his game naturally from his first year starting into year two, Brian.
Yeah, I say, you know, kind of before I dive into Adon specifically, I think that when you look at the safety position as a whole, what you just said about Adon going from sort of he was Robin last year and now he needs to be Batman. And then who's going to be Robin? And then who's going to be, you know, the next and the next and the next, right? Like, you know, there's a new Superman movie out. So you want to get in the Justice League, right? Okay, well, Don's going to, you know, he was not Superman last year. That was Xavier Watts. He's going to have to be Superman this year. Now, who's going to then step in and be, you know, who's going to be Batman? Who's going to be whatever? And I think that's where I do believe that the room as a whole is still an unsettled room because there are no certainties in the room. And what I mean by that is you're like, okay, well, we're about to talk about Adon Shuler and everything we expect of him, but all the things we're going to talk about are going to be things that we need to see from him that are even beyond what he showed a year ago. You know, like his leadership, I fully expect to be good. That's the one thing we know because he already shown that. He's an even more of a prototypical captain caliber player than even what Xavier Watts was, because Xavier was not a naturally vocal person. Adon is. And Adon has just that natural leadership ability, that natural confidence in himself, that natural understanding of I want all eyes on me when it's that moment. And I don't mean it as like a look at me kind of way, but more of a, hey, guys, we're good. Like what I mean, like eyes on me, it's like when you're in the huddle, I want all eyes on me and listen, guys, we're good. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the call. Let's follow me. You know, I think like if Adon was a military guy, he would just be a natural, like he'd be a general before anybody else in his, you know, class at the academy was, right? I mean, that's the kind of young man he is. But will the play match what you need it to match to be the guy at safety? And then you look at just the room as a whole, there is some unsettledness to the room, even when you look at it from an Adon Shuler standpoint, because we know he can be Robin, but can he be Batman? Like, I think that's where I look at it and say, I still feel like even as we get through this and we're going to talk about Adon or about the position battles, there is still a level of unsettledness to the room. But what I like, Trevor, is when you look at Adon last year, the one thing that was certain that you can take out of his season is A, he's going to be a leader for your team. B, this kid is a clutch, big moment type of young man. He just has a knack for making plays, and it just seemed like a lot of his big plays came when the team really needed it. Your offense is struggling to get anything going against A&M. Adon's right where he needs to be, makes a big pick. Your offense is struggling early against Georgia. Georgia just rips off a big throw to get the ball down the field. Who's the guy that comes in, sticks his helmet on the football, knocks it out? It's Adon Shuler. You know those two things. Now the question is, okay, but can he improve parts of his game that need improved? Can he become more of a force in areas where maybe he wasn't as much of a force last year and become sort of that star type of player for Notre Dame as opposed to just a really nice, like a really good complimentary player, which is what he was last year? Now the question is, can he raise his play and become a stud? He doesn't have to be Xavier Watts. It's about, can he become the best version of himself?
Can you be that in the moment, big moment, lights or brightest playmakers when you don't have Xavier Watts next to you? That's Adon Shuler's task for this season. And we've seen glimpses, to your point, even against Georgia Tech. Notre Dame's offense was kind of struggling to put the game away, even through, fake punt and blocked field goal, things like that. Adon Shuler steps up and he records a pick six, kind of puts a nail in the coffin in the game, makes the lead a little bit too insurmountable. So, against Virginia, same thing. He returned an interception down inside of the red zone, set the offense up for a score. And so we've seen it in spurts. Consistency is going to be a big thing with him, not only just in the big moments, but also on an every down basis, limiting the missed tackles. That was an issue for him last season. I believe he ended last year with 23 missed tackles. And so 18 missed tackles. And so there's things that he has to kind of craft with his game. But on the bright side, last year, he was also a redshirt freshman starting. And so his trajectory for getting better, we can assume that he will just remain on the same trajectory. We've talked a lot this offseason about how his transition from where he was at as a true freshman in 2023, fast forward to 2025, where he's now in the limelight, it's almost kind of a picture-perfect scenario for him. He got to learn how Xavier Watts approached the game in 23 and had the opportunity to be taken under his wing in Xavier Watts' breakout season. Last year, he got the opportunity to be alongside of him and start for 16 straight games and learn how he attacked various offenses and how he would prepare and what he would do in game moments. And now it's your opportunity to do it without him there. And so that's kind of the ideal transition you want to see. But I'm with you. The room as a whole is unsettled. It's a good spot to be in because it's not a question of if they have the ability to. Now we just have to see the product on the field translate into the production that we think it can have. But yeah, Adon Shuler is going to be the core of it. And his ability to step up into that spotlight week in and week out, that's the key, is being able to do it week in and week out is going to be huge for him.
I think what was interesting about Adon last year, guys, is he was a bit of a he had some very unique statistics. I'll just say that, in that you look at the 18 missed tackles, that's got to get a lot better. A lot better. He's going to definitely have to improve as a tackler. You look at Xavier Watts, for example. Xavier Watts had as many missed tackles last year, 13, as he did the year before with 13. Well, okay, did he get better? Yeah, because he had 262 more snaps, right? So like the percentage of misses to snaps played was much lower. Well, Adon last year in a similar number of snaps to what Xavier had the year before. Xavier in 2023 played 708 snaps. Last year, Adon had 768. So he had 60 more snaps, but he had 5 more missed tackles than what Xavier had the year before. Well, Xavier added 262 snaps to his season total, and the number of missed tackles stayed the same. And they played 3 more games. So whereas the year before he averaged a missed tackle per game, which is about where Adon was last year, slightly more than one a game, he raised that to less than 1 a game. That's got to get better. Adon is naturally going to be a guy that's going to miss some tackles because of his style of play. That's going to happen. But you've got to limit some of those. You've got to limit some of the out of control missed tackles where it's like, dude, you had that guy squared up and you just went flying out of control and missed him. Sometimes you're going to miss tackles because, number one, you're around the ball a lot, and the more you're around the ball, the more opportunities there is for missed tackles. The other part of it is, when I look at Adon, is it's you're going to have instances where the other guy makes a great play. That's just, Notre Dame plays pretty good players this year, and they're going to make the Notre Dame players miss at times. You're going to have missed tackles, but it's the out of control, it's the undisciplined, the technically undisciplined things that you look at and say, okay, that's got to get better. That's got to improve. And if he can do that, then that's where his game, I think, really takes off. And just that improvement alone makes Adon Shuler a significantly better player. And I think that's going to be key, because I don't anticipate, it was a very good question that was brought up in the chat is Adon moving into Xavier's position? And my answer is no, I don't think that he is. But I think his game is still better suited for the alley, but I am curious to kind of see how does his role change. Do they allow him to do more things in coverage than maybe they did the year before? I think that's a fair question, but I think his position won't change a whole lot. But with Adon, there's also some things in coverage he can get better at, especially when he's tasked with being in man coverage. Example is actually look at the blue gold game. Do a better job of, if you can't find the ball, try to ride that guy out of bounds. Do a better job of finding the ball. Don't let those big tight ends get their hands up and make those kind of plays. Now, part of that is those are phenomenal throws, but those are examples of, hey, you're a good player, but what's the next level for you is that you start making some, you start breaking up at least one of those two throws. I think those are the areas where if he just repeats last year, guys, they got a pretty darn good safety in Adon Shuler if he just repeats what he did last year. But if he can clean up the tackling, and if he can become just a little bit more effective making plays on the ball in coverage, and then also jumping routes to eliminate some of the throws where they would catch a ball on him and he'd tackle them, if you can eliminate some of those situations, then Adon's going to be a heck of a football player for Notre Dame this year. And I think we saw some of that improvement even last year from a coverage standpoint. Now the other part's got to improve, but we did see some improvements from him last year in coverage. I just want to see him take it to that next level this season and just be more effective playing in proper phase, jumping routes, getting more hands on the football, those type of things. And that's what he can do to take his game to that next level, to where he's not just a pretty good player in your defense, but a star player in your defense.
So at the end of the day, Adon Shuler is the known at this point. Now, there's obviously some unknowns as far as how he will progress and all of those things, but
he's the known because even if he just repeats last season, that's a good football player.
Absolutely. 100%. Yes. Thank you for putting it more succinctly than I was about to. But he's the known.
That's why I pay myself the big bucks.
That's the best line of the day right there. Just FYI, it's the best line of the day. So anyway, so Adon Shuler is the known. And so the best part is we get to talk about the unknown going into the 25 season, but the unknown is very, very intriguing. So we're going to get to that part next, Brian.
I want to talk about the position battles for Notre Dame, guys, at safety, because this is what's going to tell us whether or not this secondary as a whole can be elite. I think we talked about this on Thursday's show when we talked about the cornerbacks. There's an expectation that this is going to be one of the best cornerback rooms in college football. Are they first, second, third, fourth, fifth? That's going to be determined by, what Christian Gray does. Does he repeat last year? If he does, then they're top 5 cornerback room. If he improves his game and does what we think he's capable of, then they become 1, 2, or 3 in some realm of just lockdown corners. Plus, we have high expectations for, obviously, for Devontae Smith at the nickel. Depth is talented and all that kind of stuff. That alone, with it being a good safety room, and I do think we can at least expect it to be a good safety room.
Agreed.
Like a good, solid top 25 caliber safety room. That alone makes this one of the best secondaries in college football, in my opinion. And I would say that this safety room, of what we know about it, just what we know, meaning like what Jalen Stroman did at Virginia Tech, what Adon Shuler's done, and just the talent, because everybody has some level of projection for the most part. It's a top 15 safety room. Can we at least agree on that being the floor of the safety position?
Yeah.
If it's just okay, just everybody kind of does what they did, in the past, it's a top 15 safety room. If we get 2023 version of Jalen Stroman and 2024 version of Adon Shuler, this is a good safety room. This is a top 10 to 12 probably safety room with some good talented young players. Whether or not this becomes like an elite secondary, like a truly elite secondary, where it's like it's elite on both levels, second and third level, because I view corners as second level players and safeties as third level players. That's going to be determined by what happens opposite Adon Shuler. And because if Adon stays the way he was last year, it's a pretty good football player, but how good will that other group be? And I don't think the safety room has to be elite for the secondary to be elite. It just has to be pretty good for the entire secondary to be elite. So that's going to be determined by who wins that battle, because there's two types of position battles happening in fall camp at safety. One is who's going to start opposite Adon Shuler. That's one. And then two, what is the rotation? How does the rotation shake out? Like, is it who's the number 3? Does the number 4 force his way onto the field? Does the number 5 force his way onto the field? And the other thing, Vince, is we've seen at Notre Dame in recent years, it's like, okay, is it a 90-10 snap split, an 80-20 snap split, a 70-30 snap split, is 60-40? Like, where is the breakup? Because last year it was, if you look at Xavier Watts last year, for example, at safety, Xavier played 970 snaps. He was number 1. And then number 2 was Adon Shuler. And then number 3 at 768. And then number 3 was Rod Hurd at 409. So will it be similar to that? Or, is it going to be a thing where it's more of a true split? Because if I count up the snaps there, if I'm doing this correctly, Rod Hurd had 409 snaps. Don Shuler had 768. Xavier Watts had 970. So that's 2,147 snaps. So last year, if you look at it, Rod Hurd played 19% of the snaps of the rotation last year. Adon Shuler played, he had 35% of all those snaps. And then obviously Xavier Watts, of the total snaps they played, then you had Xavier Watts played of those numbers, he had 45.2. So you saw his split of those reps was much greater. And then if you look at it from just a pure standpoint of just how many snaps they played last year as a defense, last year Notre Dame played, 1,035 plays. So Xavier Watts played 93.7 of the snaps last year. And Rod Hurd played 39.5 of the snaps last year, and Adon Shuler played 74.2. So you had Xavier dominated the reps, Adon took a bunch of them, and then Rod would just he was there, just sort of a hybrid guy, go in there, part of the rotation, take some of the burden off of those guys. But those two guys dominated the snaps. Does that happen again this year? Or does that other spot, is it more of a, they both kind of play kind of deal? And what we've seen in recent years is it's been two guys kind of dominated the position, has been what we've seen. It was the same way the year before. Xavier played 708 snaps. DJ Brown played 595. Ramon Henderson played 304. Like, it was 3 guys, and then the 2 starters kind of had the bigger bulk of the snaps. This year, I could see it being a little bit different. But that's what this fall camp battle is going to determine, Vince, is where are you on the depth chart? And then the second part of that is how much of the volume, how big is your role? And I tell you what, it's one of the more intriguing storylines coming out of fall that I'm looking forward to going into fall camp is, what does this safety room look like when it's all said and done?
Yeah, the dynamic of the safety room is super interesting because you don't have the proven commodity. You do have a proven commodity in Adon Shuler, but he's looked at in a little bit of a different light than what Xavier Watts had coming into 2024. There's not really a whole lot of scenarios where Al Golden last year was willing to or looking to take Xavier Watts off of the football field, short of it being, hey, you kind of just need a breather.
Yep.
Then towards the end of the season, you started to see the dynamic change of, they would put 3 safeties on the field together. And Rod Hurd would also be it. So what is that? What is the Chris Ash impact in that, especially given the depth of talent that you have in the room? I'm with you, man. That's going to be really fun to watch unfold in fall camp.
So let's jump into the players in question, gentlemen. And let's start with the oldest guy in the room because he is a transfer student. I believe he's one of the oldest guys in the room anyway. I haven't checked birthdays recently.
He's a 5th-year senior.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Oldest guy is a true junior.
I didn't check
Luke
IDs.
Towns was held back like 3 years in high school, right? Or in elementary school or something. I gotta go out on a limb and say, or Jalen Stroman's like a whiz kid that graduated.
Right. Young Sheldon Jr. Yeah,
true either. He's not Austin Simmons, from Ole Miss.
Right.
So went from I'm going to reclassify from sophomore to junior. No, I'm just going to go ahead and graduate.
It's just going to be done. It's going to be done. But no. So let's start with Stroman and kind of. Trev, why don't you give us a little bit about his background, where he came from, his career up to this point and kind of what Notre Dame, why they went and got him, you know what I mean? And obviously, Brian, you can fill in some gaps if there are any, don't expect any, but if, let's talk about who Jalen Stroman is and why he's at Notre Dame in a gold helmet.
Yeah, they brought him in a very similar spot to why they brought in Rod Hurd in 2024. They had a vacated safety position. They needed somebody to step up as a starter. So they went and they got a veteran that has experience playing against a similar ACC schedule than what Notre Dame is going to face this year. There's going to be a lot of familiar opponents for Jalen Stroman. And he was somebody that was getting some early, leading up to the 2024 season. He was getting some day 2 NFL draft projections, barring the season that he had at Virginia Tech. Unfortunately, we know the story. He got injured, season-ending injury in their season opener against Vanderbilt. But if you go and you look at what he did in the year before, in 2023, he had 55 total tackles. He had 2 passes defended. The interesting thing with Stroman is how he will be used in this style of defense, because he was a very much an alley safety, come down, blow up screens. He was a sure tackler. I've seen a couple of highlight videos out there of him in the Twitter sphere and around there on social media. He's a hard hitter, similar in that sense to Adon Shuler, a little bit bigger. He's like 6'1", close to 200 pounds.
He's a little over 200.
Yep, little over 200. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't have the ability to cover, because if so, I don't know how much Mike Mickens would have been like, hey, please come to South Bend type of deal.
Yeah.
It's just Virginia Tech never asked him to do it.
Right. He was targeted 12 times his last year as a full-time starter.
Yeah.
He gave up 8 completions on 12 targets. And whereas like Xavier Watts, if you look at Xavier the last 2 years, Xavier was targeted 32 times each of the last 2 years. So are you telling me the teams are just like, no, we're going to pick on Xavier Watts more than Jalen Stroman? No, if you break down the film, they just didn't put him in those positions. They'd rob him downhill. They'd put him in the alley. They just didn't put him in a lot of pattern match type stuff or man type stuff where he was going to be in quote unquote coverage areas. And so, yes, to your point, Trev, like it's an unknown from a he was asked standpoint. But I love the part that you said is Mike Mickens didn't bring this kid in thinking he was going to be a liability in coverage.
Yeah.
He saw something on film that said, okay, this kid has the tools to be good in coverage if given the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And then enter the unknown. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to see him in spring practices or play in the blue gold game, because one of the questions is the player who is expected to step up and replace Xavier Watts on the depth chart, not from a production standpoint, big picture, was supposed to be Jalen Stroman, the experienced vet that they get in from another ACC team. Unfortunately, due to some things, he needed part of his injury cleaned up from the one that he suffered against Vanderbilt in the season opener. We didn't get to see him this spring. I believe he was a participant in the winter workouts and then was held out for the spring. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, he was brought in for the winter. Yeah.
Yep.
And then he had to get some stuff cleaned up, and that's why they chose not to play him in the spring.
Gotcha. He is one of the people that I'm very much looking forward to seeing play in fall camp, because as we're going to break down here in a little bit, the rest of the safety room had a very good spring, which on one hand puts your mind at ease a little bit, but then on the other hand, it adds to the dynamic of the room of, okay, now really what does this look like? But Jalen Stroman, he brings the experience to the table, played against very similar, almost identical opponents in certain cases that Notre Dame is going to be facing this season. But this spring, because of the unknown around his coverage ability, that's going to be one of the bigger things that I'm going to be looking for in fall.
So, like, my question is going to be, is Jalen Stroman best suited to be Adon Shuler's backup or Adon Shuler's sidekick?
His running mate, yeah.
Running mate. It's a much better – because sidekick has such a, like a level. Running mate. I think it's a good way of putting it. I don't want to say partner in crime because I'm like, no, that doesn't fit Adon Shuler at all. Just kind of looking at it from the standpoint, because his game is very similar to Adon's.
Yeah.
based on what he did at Tech.
Physicality and all that kind of stuff.
And just how he was used to come
Right.
downhill and be a good tackler and
Right.
and those type of things. And so that's what he's going to have to prove if he wants to win a starting job is, can you cover?
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, they're not going to ask him to be Xavier Watts. They didn't bring him in saying, hey, we think you can be Xavier Watts, but it's more so saying, hey, we believe in your athletic skill. We believe in your ability to do this if put in the right position. So we think you can thrive in this role. But he's going to have to prove that. That's the key. At the very least, if Jalen Stroman is your second best safety or best safety, so basically in one of the top two, you're going to use them in ways where you're going to be pretty good against the run. And there's things you can do coverage-wise to protect your safeties a little bit in those situations that don't put them in a whole lot of covering slots, covering, you'll cover backs and tight ends, and that's pretty much what your role is going to be. I think there's things they can certainly do in that regard, fellas, where, I believe essentially that he can win the job and be basically the same exact version of Adon Shuler if he's just that next best guy. But is that going to be good enough? So like that part I'm not concerned about. Like, so I'm trying to figure out how I want to make this point. If he's just as good as Adon Shuler in coverage, and they're like, or stylistically they're the same kind of player, and he's their second best safety or co 1A, 1B, whatever, you're going to be pretty good at safety. You're just going to have to alter certain things. But my question is more so this: will that be good enough to keep Bronte Johnson and Jadon Blair, especially off the field? And will it be good enough, because I think Luke Talich is a very similar type of player to the two of them, will that even be better than what Luke Talich can be? I think that's going to be the question for Jalen Stroman is you got to pick this up pretty quickly. From what I'm told, he's a pretty smart guy, and he'll pick the defense up pretty well. And he was around the team all spring, so he was there for all the install. He was there for all the teaching and all that. He just didn't get to physically do a ton of it.
That kind of leads into my kind of not final question, but like the last thing I want to touch on for Stroman is the fact that he didn't participate in spring on the field. And to Trevor's point, the other guys we're going to talk about all had really good springs. So is this like a 2 steps back, 1 step forward potential situation, or does that make
Jalen?
Yeah, or is it no deal because he's a 5th-year guy and doesn't necessarily need to be on the field? Like, where do you fall on kind of where that puts him going into the summer and the spring, or in summer and the fall?
I don't think it's something that I'm going to ignore and act like it not going to be an impact at all, because what it did was, I think for the team as a whole, for the unit as a whole, it's going to benefit the room that he didn't practice this spring.
More reps for everybody else, yeah.
Right. And they needed it more than he did. Yes, I know he needs reps in the system and in the defense, but this is not a kid that's going to step out on the field against Miami and be like overwhelmed by the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not where Adon Shuler is. Jalen Stroman is. This is a kid who's, number one, his stadium is one that is not an easy place to play. He's played at Doak Campbell against a 13-1 Florida State team. He's played at Louisville when they won 10 games and were playing the ACC title game. He's played in some of those places the last couple of years. He's been in those moments. He's had to thrive in those moments. And so I don't think this is something that where I'm looking at it saying like, gee, I don't know if he can handle the moment. We know that about Jalen Stroman. I think he's proven that. And the fact that he chose Notre Dame shows me a little bit level of maturity for him, knowing he was walking into a loaded room. So I think it helped the room as a whole, but I also don't want to act like it had no impact whatsoever negatively on Jalen Stroman either, because twofold. Number one is you just gave a bunch of dudes with a lot of talent, a lot of reps that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten. And then number two, I look at it and say this is I do think he has a level that he needs to get to where he could have really benefited from the reps personally. Now, I think he can get caught up quickly if it was just he's the guy, there's no doubt, he's the starter. I think Jalen would be fine. without practicing in the spring. I think he'll be fine. But will he be fine in a competition of players of equal or in some instances superior talent? That's more of the question. Does that make sense? Like, so if there was no debate of who was going to start, let's say his 2023 season was at Notre Dame, and like, guys, look, he's going to be the starter. I wouldn't be upset about him missing the spring, even with a new D coordinator. I'd say he'll get caught up. He'll get caught up this summer and then fall camp. But I think the question is now, will it be enough to hold off the talented younger players that are also pushing?
Yeah.
That's more of my question mark. Did he give them a window to step into a void this spring?
Not necessarily a Wally Pipp situation, but similar in that you open the door and let's see if these guys take advantage of it, kind of a deal. So
it's basically what happened to Rod Hurd last year. Rod still played. Jalen Strome was going to play for Notre Dame this year, barring injury.
Agreed.
He's going to be a very important part of the safety room this year at Notre Dame. I have no doubt about that. Jalen Strome is going to play, and he's going to be an important part of the defense. But is that going to be in an Adon Shuler, Xavier Watts role, or is it going to be in a Rod Hurd role?
Right.
That's the question. This isn't like where, like, to your point, that's why, you say the Wally Pipp thing, and you're like, it's not the same thing because Wally Pipp never really played again.
Right, exactly.
But it's more so like, are you going to be Rod Hurd or are you going to be Adon Shuler?
Right. Yeah.
Are like that? That's going to be the question, and it could even be different. It could be like neither, because there's two guys that are going to play somewhat. I mean, there's a world in which Jalen Stroman and Luke Talich and Jadon Blair and Bronte Johnson have a much closer number of snaps. Like, it could be a thing where Jalen Stroman doesn't start at the field safety spot, but he takes Adon's reps when Adon needs a breather, and he also takes field safety reps when the field safety guy needs a breather. And because there's a 3-man rotation at that field safety, and he's getting Adon's reps when Adon's on the sidelines getting a breather, he may end up being number 2 or a really close 3 in snaps, even though he's not a starter. That's where I envision Jalen having an impact this year.
So let's go through a couple of these other guys who are going to be battling for time in the back. And the first guy is a guy that has taken, a very interesting path to his current position on the team, and that's Luke Talich. And he's just a great story, frankly, in my opinion. He bet on himself. It paid off, and here he is battling for a starting position. So, Trevor, I'll let you kind of lead this one off on Luke and kind of what he has to do in the fall to garner some of that playing time that it's so coveted.
Yeah, I mean, Luke Talich, to your point, it's a great story, and I love his journey up to this point. He's kind of been that special teams phenom. The last couple seasons for Notre Dame, had that big hit in the Penn State game in the Orange Bowl on punt return. Still go back and watch that once a week. Fantastic hit. But for Luke Talich, it's kind of that moment where it's like, okay, you now have your opportunity to step into the limelight on defense and meaningful snaps. He had the pick 6 against Florida State, kind of in mop-up duty at the end of the game. Now can your performance in the spring and your experience in big moments last season, can that translate into you putting it all together this fall because of the rest of the talent in the room, because of Jalen Stroman's potential emergence? This is kind of almost like a now or never type situation for Luke Talich. He's a true junior. He has really good talent behind him. He has even more talent coming in the 2026 class. This is a big fall camp for him. And he's going to have to show that he's going to have to put a lot of the narratives to rest. We've already started to do that here on this channel, but there are some people that still view him as the walk-on. There's still some people out there that view Luke Talich. Yeah, they just like him because he's 6'4", but he's not that fast. He was a former walk-on. I know none of us three view him that way, in that he's just some walk-on that caught some fantastic opportunity. He is somebody that is a legitimate athlete that can make a significant impact on this defense. But it is going to be a big spring for him. Him in coverage, he's going to have to be able to show that he is more of a capable, safety and pass coverage, similar to what Xavier Watts was. And I'm not expecting the same amount of production. I don't think he's going to walk away this season with 6 or 7 interceptions. But He's going to have to prove that, yes, in the blue gold game, he led the team in tackles, and we've seen him fly down into the box and make some impact plays. But as we just discussed, that's Adon Shuler's strength, and that's also Jalen Stroman's strength. Use your 6'4" frame and size to be more of an effective member of the coverage unit, not just as another alley safety. That's what I'm going to be looking for out of Luke Talich this fall.
I almost am just tired of mentioning him as a former walk-on. Because
Right.
he is.
Technically, he
but
is. Yes.
it's like it's such a misleading situation of how he got to Notre Dame.
Agreed.
He had full committable offers from Utah and Washington State. He chose to come to Notre Dame because he wanted a degree from Notre Dame, and he knew that he was only going to be a walk-on for a year at most, maybe just a semester. And I think it was actually just a semester.
Yeah, I think it was.
And fortunately for him, he came from a family situation where they could handle it for the time that was needed, and he was able to do it. But Luke Talich is not he wasn't brought to Notre Dame in the same way that Chris Fink was. It's not the same kind of story of as Chris Fink stepping into a starting role and becoming an impact player. Nobody thought that Chris Fink, when he got recruited to Notre Dame, was going to be what he was. Luke Talich was brought to Notre Dame as a guy that was eventually expected to fight for a job in the safety for Notre Dame. And that's why I kind of get frustrated by that. And I've seen people say, why did he look slow on the pick six? Well, number one, I don't think he really I don't think he was slow. He's 6'4" with really long arms. I've said this a million times. Those guys don't look as fast on the football field as they are, but you're going to cover a lot of ground. I also don't think he ever really gained his balance from catching the pass and then spinning around. You know how it is when you start running, that minute you stumble, you never get back into full stride. And I think that had everything to do with it. But, like, I watched this kid play, and this kid's got range. Go watch him going down the field against Penn State when he lights that kid up. You're going to see a kid that can run. Go watch a guy that's running down on kickoffs. He can run. But he's not like a 4'4" guy either. But when you're 6'4" with long arms and you're a pretty smooth athlete, you don't have to be that. You don't have to be a 4'4" guy. Jadon Blair's not a 4'4" guy either. Kyle Hamilton wasn't a 4'4" guy. Kyle Hamilton was barely a 4'5" guy and that's when he was training for several months to run the fastest he could run, and how fast he ran was going to determine it was going to impact him millions. Because I think we can all agree that if Kyle Hamilton would have ran a 4.38 instead of like a 4.58 at the combine, he wouldn't have dropped till 14. And so
yeah, his second contract will make up for it.
Right. But Luke's not a burner. Like, I'm never going to sit here and argue like Luke's a 4'4" guy. I'm never going to argue that. I just think he's rangy. That's why I say he's more rangy than he is like fast. And on a football field, like in a 100-meter dash, okay, you can be rangy all you want. You're still getting smoked by the really fast 5'11" guy. On a football field, when it's shorter area that you're covering in different type of movements, the range overcomes a lack of pure vertical speed. Just like you'll see safeties who have great vertical speed who are terrible defensive backs because they can't run in the way that they need to. So I think when I look at Luke Talich, it's like, I'm not worried about the athleticism and the speed. What I need to see from Luke Talich is more assertiveness. That was the knock on him last year. In talking to different sources, it was Luke has all the talent in the world, but Luke's got to let it go. He's got to just like, dude, don't always be so worried about making a mistake. You don't overthink it. Don't overthink it and say, hey, I think I'm supposed to do this. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. Just go play ball. And we still saw a little bit of that in the spring, to be honest, at times. What I liked about him in the spring game is as the game wore on, like even that first long run by Jadarian Price, Luke Talich kind of came in the hole and started to slow down, and that allowed the tight end to get off of the block and block him out of the hole. After that, he was more, okay, I'm just going to keep going and go to the ball. It's that assertiveness from Luke. He needs to be more, dude, just go play. Go play 100 miles an hour. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. Trust yourself, trust your teaching, trust what you're taught, and then go play. I think that's the thing with Luke is if he can do that, then I fully expect Luke Talich to be in the rotation in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Whether that's as a starter, number 2, rotation guy, maybe he becomes the third safety instead of them putting like a rover in the game. they put a Jalen Stroman or a Luke Talich down there as a third safety, and when they want to get against a team that's maybe running more perimeter screen game or perimeter runs or running the ball more, then that's something that we'll see.
So another guy that we want to talk about has gained a lot of steam in the spring and a little bit in the fall as well. But Tay Johnson is somebody that a lot of people are talking about and what he brings to the table. And I know the coaches love Tay and what he is and what he could be. Is there a chance, Brian, that he pushes for some playing time in this secondary?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just want to set you up. Just want to put the softball on the tee there for you.
Vince, when we saw him at Irish Invasion going into his junior year of high school, I think is what it was. He was tall, fast, rangy, and skinny. Very competitive. You'll love this, Vince, as a coach. You go to these camps. You have you had two-way players in high school.
Oh, all the time.
You have these summer workouts, and you have that guy like, I'm just working on receiver right now, or I'm just working on DB right now. It was awesome watching Tay because he would line up at receiver, run a route, and then run back to the defensive back line and jump in and take a rep at DB. He would take a rep at DB and then run and jump to the front of the wide receiver line. He just wanted to compete. He didn't care if it was a receiver, DB. He just wanted to compete. And that's when I kind of first fell in love with Bronte as a prospect, because you don't know that. And I'll just be honest, having recruited the city of Fort Wayne when I was coaching, you don't always get that with some of the athletes from there. You do from some play. I mean, Jalen Smith was that way, and Tyler Eifert and all that. But like, it's a question mark. Like, this kid's talented, but does he have a drive to be great? So that stood out to me right away with Bronte at that camp. But then you see a guy that's 6'2". He's and talk about the skinny Trev. You and I saw him at this year's Irish Invasion. He was working the camp. He's filling out. Like he had muscles. I mean, he looked like, okay, that's a college safety. And I thought his improvement this spring was great to see. And I wonder how much playing cornerback last year is going to help him, because this is how versatile he is. When Jaden Mickey left and they started having some issues with injuries at corner, Benjamin Morrison goes down, Chance Tucker's out. They moved Bronte Johnson to corner, and he was getting in the end of some of those blowouts at corner last season. So when you talk about putting this unit together, he's the guy that presents some of the most potentially impactful pass game production. Guys, he's the guy that has the skill set that could eventually have a role similar to Xavier Watts. But Vince, what I saw from him this spring, which I think was the most important, is we already knew that was eventually going to be there. Bronte showed me the willingness to come downhill and stick. And we saw that, Vince, I think you were at that practice, but there was a play where they ran a play, it bounced, he was filling the alley, and it's him against a running back, and he just comes down here and pops the guy. You're like, okay, that's what I didn't know that Bronte was going to be able to do. And when we saw him do that, you're like, okay, like, yeah, Bronte's got a chance to live up to the potential, because he was always a bit of a low floor, high ceiling guy. For injuries are a big concern for him. I mean, he had an injury in high school that kept him out. He's had some little bumps and bruises in his 1 year at Notre Dame. He's got to stay healthy. Can his body hold up? He's definitely put on some armor. He's got the athleticism, but does he have the feel for the position, and is he going to be willing to come downhill and smack people? That's what I was encouraged to see. And to me, in my opinion, just God-given ability. The two most physically gifted players on the depth chart are Jadon Blair, who we're going to talk about in a second, and Bronte Johnson. And you could argue Bronte might be at the top of that list. It's at least debatable that Bronte's at the top of that list. And that's what gets you kind of exciting about what he can be. And look, I think Bronte's got a shot to win a starting job. I'm not predicting it. He's still young. He's still got a lot to learn. He's a year behind Luke from a development standpoint, but the tools are there for Bronte to be a factor. At the very least, my expectations for Bronte Johnson this year is he's going to be in the rotation in some capacity, and he's going to be on just about every special teams coverage unit. Like, that's my minimum expectation for him this year. The ceiling for him this year, you guys tell me if you disagree with this, my ceiling for Bronte Johnson this year is that he eventually wins the starting job opposite Adon Shuler and gives you legit rangy coverage ability, skill at that field safety spot where Xavier Watts played. That's how I feel. That's what I feel his ceiling is this year. Can he be an All-American player this year? I'm not saying that, but as far as like the number, like, what did you guys say? The running mate, so to speak, for Adon Shuler. I think he's got a shot to win that. Will it be game one? That I don't know. Will it be, because like that's like, okay, do they want Jalen Stroman's experience kind of being on the field first against Miami? Maybe.
Yeah.
But I think Bronte's got a shot to win a spot in the rotation, and he's got a shot to win the starting job.
Or at least on the field early, right?
Yes.
Like, just kind of taking in everything.
Right.
And like,
but it's not a given because of how deep they are.
Yeah.
But he's got the tools to absolutely be that. I think Bronte Johnson showed me in the spring. And now part of this is like I already had an opinion of him coming in. And so part of it is kind of confirmation bias. But that's kind of what this entails. Like you had an opinion of a guy. Did he show you that you weren't wrong in those opinions? Well, athletically, yes, he did. He showed me that the athleticism that we thought he had is there. Now, can he become a great football player? That's going to be the question for Bronte. But man, he's impressive athletically, like very impressive athletically.
Ceiling, I think, is up for debate between him and Jadon. I'm with you there. But my takeaway from the spring with Bronte Johnson is I think right now he might be your most well-rounded safety in the rotation.
Certainly the returners.
Yeah. I mean, you go through and you think about Jalen Stroman, his coverage ability, it's unknown, but I have to assume that it's relatively high, or his potential there is relatively high, or else Mike Mickens wouldn't have made the push to bring him to South Bend. Luke Talich, we know what he is from an alley safety standpoint, his willingness to hit and stick his nose down in the box. But from a pure coverage question mark, that is it's still one that's pretty high up on the list. But I would say that Bronte Johnson answered the question of his ability to stick his nose in around the box and fill the alley more than the answers that I got from Luke Talich from a coverage standpoint, if that makes sense. And so I think there is a case to be made that he might be your most well-rounded safety going into fall camp from what we got to see in the spring. Now, I think the next guy that we're going to talk about may have something to also say about that as well, along with the other list of guys that we had talked about. But from just what I got to see in the spring, I think Tate Johnson answered that question for me. He is definitely not out of the conversation to solidify himself in that starting lineup. Definitely in the rotation for sure.
The next guy we're going to talk about is a guy that sticks out when you see him walking around the defensive secondary. That's the best way I can describe it because he sticks out walking around. And, that guy is Jadon Blair. And Jadon Blair has a lot going for him in this competition as well. And I think he has also, one of the things we noticed in the spring, Brian, is that he's not afraid to be vocal with guys too. And I think that's a huge check mark for me if I was back there, trying to make a decision about who's going to get playing time and all that. I think from a mental standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, I feel like he checks some of those boxes off the bat for a young guy. And I think that is a very exciting piece of this for Mr. Blair.
I mean, it's funny you say that because he does not look like a football player. I mean, he looks like a tall shooting guard, like not like a normal shooting guard, like a tall. He'd be the tallest guard that Notre Dame would have on their basketball team this year, except for what? I mean, do we count Ryder Frost as a guard, or is he more of like a wing? Like he's tall, he's long, and he's filling out. I saw a picture of him from the summer, and you're like, okay, Jadon's looking like he's filling out. He's starting to look the part more and more and more. But guys, he was like Jadon. Obviously, the injury he had that kept him out of the spring game was not a legitimate, like it was legitimate. It wasn't a significant injury.
Right.
If it was a real game, he flat out would have played.
Correct.
And if you'd have seen him moving around in pregame, you're like, it's just like, look, he's having a great spring. Let's not take a chance of him being out there and getting rolled up on. We got a million safeties.
It's a practice. Like
like what I was told by a couple people actually is that in the two practices beforehand, he had like 4 or 5 interceptions in the practices. Now it's like, okay, I'm a little nervous about the quarterback still all these picks, but it's like with Jadon, it's like, oh no, he's like 4 yards behind my guy. I've got room to throw that ball. And then you throw and you're like, oh, he hadn't started really running yet. Like, and then he starts using them go gadget legs, and then next thing you know, he closes down and does that. But like with Adon, I knew he's going to be good in coverage. I mean, he's rangy, he's fast, he's smart. He was a very good receiver at Mount Tabor in North Carolina. The question was how quickly can he get used to the physical part? And like Bronte, there were times in the spring where we'd see Adon come down and just pop people. And you're like, okay, yes, he's got to get stronger. Same with Bronte. Bronte's still got to get stronger. He's not going to look like Steve Atwater this season. It's not that they're just thumpers, but it's the willingness to come down there and smack people. We've seen big safeties that are ankle biters. Some guys just don't like contact. That's just the reality of it. Some guys get uncomfortable. Really, they're not willing to just throw themselves. Like, not everybody was meant to be wedge busters back in the day. You know, we were talking about kick returns the other day. There were some big, strong guys that could run fast. You wish wanted to be wedge busters, but like he wanted no part of that smoke. And then there's that little 5'9", like 175-pound kid that's like, I'll do it. You know, it's like, well, yeah, I know you're crazy and you'll do it, but like you're gonna throw yourself out sideways and bounce right off that thing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like, but he had that mindset, like, I want this smoke. And so with Bronte and Adon, that's what was good to see is how quickly would they adapt to the physical part of the game, because they were used very similarly in high school in that they both played two ways, because Bronte played quarterback for his team as a senior. They were both more rangy cover type of players. And yeah, Adon would tackle well in high school, but how was he going to feel about coming down and tackling Jadarian Price and Kedron Young and Jabron Payne? And that's a different type of back than what he faced in high school. And the fact that he was willing to do that and do it physically was a sight to see. There's not one of these kids in spring was I like, I don't know if that guy wants to be that kind of, and that's what is encouraging to see. And that's where you're like, okay, at least mindset wise, Mike Mickens has made smart decisions with who they went after, because they all have the mindset. They're all smart kids. And like Bronte, Adon was getting a lot of first team snaps the last couple of days of fall camp or spring practice. There was the one clip that Notre Dame put out of him breaking up a pass against Eli Raritan. And then the next clip of it is him, you know, shaking hands with Adon Shuler. Well, why was he covering Eli Raritan, and why was Adon Shuler dapping him up on the field? Because it was ones against ones.
They were out there together
with the ones.
Yeah.
So they all got work. Don't read too much into that statement. They all got work with the ones, but they all got work with the ones because they're all in that competition. There were other safeties that didn't get work with the ones. I don't know that Ethan Long got works with the ones. I don't know that Kennedy Urlacher was getting work with the one. Would have gotten work with the ones had he stayed around. And so you look at all those type of things and you say, okay, he's in this conversation. And you talk about best all-around game, Trevor, you mentioned that. I believe you said that about Bronte. Agree. It's these two are the two that have the best all-around potential. There's no question about it. That's why we get into the ceiling is so high for them, because they're both long, they're both rangy, they're both very athletic, but they also both have the potential to be impact players against the pass and the run. And that's why, I mean, look, Adon's going to be really hard to keep off the field. Really hard to keep off the field this season. And I just, barring injury, I don't know how that happens. He's going to play. The question is, does he start? Is he number 3? Is he number 4? What's that answer going to be? And the thing I like about Adon is he can play both safety spots, but he's another guy that I could see if you're playing a team, a spread team, an air raid team that likes to throw a ton of perimeter screens and a ton of bubble screens and slant routes and quick routes and outside runs like a USC. There's a case to be made that at times you may want a Bronte or a Adon Blair in that slot position as opposed to Devontae Smith, because you want a bigger body that's blowing up the perimeter run game and the perimeter screen game in certain looks. And I think he's got the tools to do that. So yeah, I mean, he's a big kid. I mean, we met him. He was hanging out at the IB tailgate for a while for the Indiana game. Comes from a great family. His dad played in the NFL for a little bit as a D lineman, if that gives you any sense of like
it's put together.
Yes. But he looks like his dad, but he's not built like his dad. He's tall like his family, but his dad's like just a big guy. Adon has a little bit of a different frame, but you see where the DNA comes from. His dad played D1 defensive line, played in the NFL for a little bit, I think 3 or 4 years as a D lineman in the NFL. So he's another guy that's got some of the DNA. He's an NFL dad. It's just not the Plexico Burress, Jerome Bettis Jr., Larry Fitzgerald, Thomas Davis Jr. type of DNA. But he's another kid whose dad was a former professional athlete. And what I love about Jadon too, and Bronte's this way as well, but Jadon is a very confident young man, very confident. But there's also a level of humility to his confidence. His confidence comes from more of the work that he's put in to get to where he is as it is about just, I'm the man. He's confident in his ability because he works at it. And I think that's an important piece to this puzzle too. There's no sense of, you better play me because you paid me this much money in NIL and I was a highly ranked recruit. No, it's like, dude, I know I want to play, so I'm going to go in and earn it. And he's gonna be hard to keep off the field, guys. As long as he can stay healthy, this is the kid I'm most certain will be in the rotation, other than Jalen Stroman. The only question is where. Is he 2? Is he 3? Is he 4? Is he 5? But I highly doubt that he's gonna not, like, he won't be in the rotation in some capacity.
Trevor, I'm going to throw this next one to you, sir, because a part of this is, we kind of talked about this before. It's like, where do we put the nickel? Do we put it with the safeties? Do we put it with the corners? And the nickel position is a position that has corners that are trying out for it, and it has safeties that are kind of in the mix. And so we do want to talk about it a little bit when we have this conversation about safety, because there are some safeties, that are in the mix. And so there's two guys that we kind of want to talk about here. And we've already kind of talked about a little bit about Ben Minich and
Tabron Benny Powell.
And Tabron Benny, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
We have not talked about Ben Minich yet, but Ben and Tabron Benny Powell are the two guys that are kind of in the mix at nickel as well, whether that's starting or whether that's in the rotation or whatever the case may be. But they're two safeties that they could see some time at nickel, Trev.
Yeah, I mean, one of the bigger question marks that not a lot of people are talking about going into fall camp is the depth at nickel. There's a lot of names being thrown into this hat. And Ben Minich and Tabron Benny Powell are two of them. Then you also have Carson Hobbs and Dallas Golden and Corey Thomas. So what does that look like for them? But, we started to see Ben Minich take more snaps at the nickel position this past spring, kind of helping round out the depth. One thing that I've been very consistent about talking about was I did not know how fast Ben was until watching him in spring practice and in spring games. I know the biggest question for him is going to be, him remaining healthy and being able to round out that depth. But he's a player that, can play safety, maybe projects a little bit better to the nickel position. And then Tabron Benny Powell, he's somebody that has a lot of length. You just kind of look at him. He has long arms. He has a good size frame. I think he's like 6'1", 6'2" in that area. And I think for him, it's a little bit of, okay, safety room is loaded. I have a pretty high ceiling. What is the quickest path to get me on the field and kind of prove my worth? And I think the nickel position is wide open in terms of a depth barring injury. I don't think any one of the guys that we mentioned is going to insert themselves in the starting lineup, because I think that's held down pretty securely by Devontae Smith. But it's also unrealistic that he's going to take 800 snaps this upcoming season at the nickel. There could be different looks that they want to present. Brian brought up another scenario earlier talking about Bronte Johnson or Jadon Blair. If they're going up against a team like a USC, maybe they want a bigger body around the line of scrimmage closer to the box. Maybe they insert themselves in. That's kind of Tabron Benny Powell. He's a little bit of that bigger, nickel corner type of build. And so the conversation around those two are extremely interesting. And I'm going to be keeping my eye out on both those guys heading into fall camp, and as far as how the nickel depth is going to start playing itself out.
What a lot of people don't know is that Ben Minich is one of the fastest defensive backs they have outside of like the two corners. He's very fast. The concern with Ben Minich is his body just hasn't held up yet so far. He's been banged up a lot, but he's more of a factor in the than maybe we think, as far as a guy that like could play either at safety or at the nickel spot, or maybe both. I mean, he's the one that had that great pick of CJ Carr. I mean, he read the route perfectly, stepped in front of it, picked the pass off. I think he was playing nickel in that particular play. Tabron Benny Powell, a guy that I was not real high on coming out of high school, he was solid in the spring game. I mean, it was like, okay, this kid showed me a little something. Like his his breakup, I think it was Elijah Burris, but just running on a crossing route. Kenny Minchie threw it a little bit late. Tabron did a great job of breaking in front of the receiver, breaking the pass up. Like, okay, if this is the two guys at the bottom of your depth chart, which a lot of us think, thought going into spring, you've got a phenomenal safety depth chart. But I think what helps both of them is they have the potential to play multiple spots. Their guys that right now are getting a lot of time in nickel, which then I think helps them if Notre Dame's getting into situations where, let's say, the coverage isn't good enough at safety. Like, okay, well, these are two guys that can help you in coverage at safety. So I think they solidify the depth, but they're also going to be factors. Like, what if something happens to Devontae Smith? Who's that next guy? Like Vince brought up, who's that next guy? It could be one of these two guys. It could be a corner. It could be one of these two guys. And so they're going to get their chance. And it's you don't often see where you go into a season where literally every returner to position is in competition to start, where you're not freaking out about your lack of depth. Because there's times like, well, we only got three guys. Every veteran coming back is going to be, in the rotation some way, which is kind of true corner, right? Like, we don't take out Chance Tucker because of we don't know where he's at injury-wise, but like every other returner is going to be in the two deep. It's because there's only three other returners from last year, you know what I mean? But this is a situation where like they're all battling, and it's deep. It's a deep position group, but they're all battling for some kind of role. But I got to say, Ben Minnick and Tabron Benny Powell deserve some mention here because they both impressed us during the spring, especially in the blue gold game, making plays on the ball. And, we don't talk enough about them, but then they're talented footballers. I've had people tell me Ben Minnick can play. He's just undersized and gets banged up a little bit, which hopefully that doesn't keep happening. But you talk to anybody around the program and say, that kid's athletic as heck. He's fast. He can play. And Tabron's been a surprise. So I like it when I don't think a kid's that good or don't think a kid's Notre Dame caliber player, when he kind of comes and says, well, actually, I can play here. Now, the issue with Tabron is he's still tight-hipped. He's one of the few guys in the secondary safety position that got really tight hips. And that concerns me a little bit. But honestly, he showed me the instincts and feel and speed to be able to overcome that a little bit during the blue gold game. So I was pleasantly surprised with what I saw from Tabron. He's already better. Like where he was this spring is where I thought he might be able to get to by his junior year. Maybe senior year. So that's a good sign.
This is the part of the depth chart where I usually say, let's talk about the young guys. We've been talking about young guys. Yeah. We're going to talk about the youngest guys. and we're talking about Brandon Logan and Ethan Long. And, I don't think that these guys are necessarily in the running to start, or maybe they could surprise and get into the rotate. What are the expectations for these young guys, Brian?
I'll just say this, and I'll let Trev talk about it any further if he wants to, but there's been years in the past where Ethan Long and Brandon Logan would have had a shot to come in and crack the two deep. But it's going to be very hard for them to do so this year just because of how deep the position group is. But, Ethan was solid this spring, long, tall, rangy, did some good things. Brandon Logan's an extremely athletic player that can also – now, Brandon Logan's more in the Ben Minnick, Tabron Benny Powell role of a safety that can also play nickel. And so it wouldn't shock me if Brandon Logan gets some shots early on at nickel, because he's a guy that is 5'11", 190, fast. Remember, he ran a 4.4 at Notre Dame's Irish Invasion going into his senior year. Elite athlete, an elite baseball player, also was previously committed to Vanderbilt. I don't know. Did he get drafted, Vince? Do you know if he got drafted?
I don't know.
I'm going to go look that up. But
yeah.
Anyway,
he's planning on playing for Notre Dame too, right? In the spring.
Yeah. The only concern was, and I completely forgot to go look it up, is there was some concern that if he got drafted high enough that he might, go to the NFL draft. But I didn't look and see where he got drafted, so I'll have to look that up. But anyway, the point is, I think Brandon Logan is a kid. Yeah, he went undrafted. It's only like 10 rounds now, right?
It's so much smaller than it ever was before. It used to go like 30 rounds, like a ridiculous amount. And now that they've gotten, I'm going to go on a tangent. Now they've gotten rid of a bunch of minor league teams. They don't need to have as big of a draft because they don't have as many teams.
They got rid. What leagues did they get rid of?
I mean, they got rid of like a ton of minor league.
Okay.
Like each minor league team or each major league team, I think, only has 4 total teams.
Gotcha.
Because they used to have, all kinds of like single A levels.
They had Florida. They had the Florida League or an Arizona League. You had they had 2 rookie leagues. You had the high. It was like the Reds. They had their team in Arizona and then team in Florida.
So it was high A, low A.
Billings, which is the high A rookie team. Then you had the low A team. Then you had your high A team, your double A team, and your triple A team. So
now it's just A, double A, triple A, and then I think they have like a fall league, like a rookie league. And
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, they've downsized it big time. So
that's unfortunate. But anyway,
yeah.
And I know the draft used to be 50 rounds long, and now it's
like 10, it's so much shorter. Yeah. So much shorter. Yeah.
So that was kind of good news for Notre Dame.
For Notre Dame football, yeah.
Well, yeah, that he's not, that he didn't get drafted higher, but heck of a baseball player, heck of an athlete. He might have a shot, but I just think these 2 kids are most likely destined for redshirt seasons. Yeah. And I normally don't advocate for red shirts for skill players, but because of how young this position group is overall, and I think both of these kids are raw, Brandon technically, Ethan physically, I think both could really benefit from a red shirt where they can get some separation between themselves and Bronte and Luke and Jadon and that type of thing. And it's also their presence is also why you're not seeing Notre Dame pushing for another big safety class. They've got 1 pure safety in the class, and that's Nick Reddish, who I say pure safety as far as how he's used in high school. He could easily be a nickel as well. And then there's the expectation Joe O'Brien's going to move to safety, and they're like, okay, we're good. We're good. Why? Because they're so deep there, but also because they're so young there. And I fully expect Ethan and Brandon Logan to redshirt. And if they don't redshirt, that's a good sign for Notre Dame. That means they're ready to play. But I don't expect either to be factors this year.
Yeah, I was going to say around the redshirt conversation, it's going to be interesting to see if Marty Biaggi has something to say about one of those 2 guys redshirting or not. That's always going to be a factor as well, because having somebody as athletic as Brandon Logan and somebody with the size and athleticism of what Ethan Long has, it's going to be hard to keep them off the special teams unit. But as far as like pure defensive snaps, I'm with you completely.
Yeah, special teams coordinators love safeties and linebackers. And because they're usually fast and athletic, and especially at Notre Dame. And so he's going to have kind of his pick of the litter. So, yeah, that's going to be some interesting, boardroom conversations when it comes to, who they're going to redshirt and who they're not and what that looks like and all of those different things. Those conversations, I'm sure, have gotten interesting over at Notre Dame because of the depth of talent, for sure. So, because guys that would have never redshirted in the past are now redshirting because there's so much depth and talent when it comes to special teams and everything else. So a very, very fun conversation to have. So that's going to do it for our depth chart breakdown, fellas. Be sure to give us hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, share with your family and friends. And of course, jump on the boards over at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Check out the written content over at irishbreakdown.com. There's always some fun stuff over there. I know that Trevor's been working on his countdown series as well. So there's always good content over at irishbreakdown.com. So you definitely want to jump on that. And of course, like I said, jump on the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Final segment of the Notre Dame segment of the show, the Notre Dame part of the show, is questions, matchups, bold predictions. This is kind of where we have some fun here. Guys, and there are some questions about the safety room, and we have kind of touched on some of them here and there, but we definitely want to get them all into one area and talk about the questions that we have going into the fall and into the 25 season. And considering we don't know who's going to start and we don't know what the rotation is going to be, there are definitely some questions. And the first question is actually about the guy that we know is going to start, and that is Adon Shuler. And we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, Trev, but Adon Shuler, can he take that next step? Obviously, his physical maturity, his physical play, and all of that, his leadership, being a leader of the second. He didn't have to be a leader of the secondary, last year because Xavier Watts was right next to him. He didn't have to do that. Well, Xavier Watts is now down in Georgia doing his thing in Atlanta. and now Adon Shuler is left behind. And can he step up and be the man? That's a big question moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the last couple of seasons, really outside of 2022, Notre Dame has had a guy in the safety room. Really going back, I mean, 2018, you think they had Alohi Gilman and Jalen Elliott. They come back in 2019. You also had Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton was your guy until 2021, and then he was gone. 22, a little bit of a question mark. Xavier Watts was coming into his own, and then obviously we know what happened.
Thought it was going to be Brandon Joseph,
yeah,
but he was not that good.
No, nope. And then Xavier Watts emerges in 23 and 24. He was your guy. And Adon Shuler's next in line to take on that role. There are aspects of his game where he is already kind of the guy in the safety room. We alluded to it earlier. Last spring, you guys saw him pulling veterans aside and letting him know in a coaching manner, not a demeaning manner, of what they did wrong on the play, how to correct it, the proper way to read it. So there's aspects of his game that is already kind of there.
I mean, it was coaching, but it was intense. It wasn't like, hey, fella, just wanted to go over with your problem.
Yeah, it was, you know what you're supposed to be doing.
It was intense. It was like, it was getting on him, but it wasn't like, he was getting like, you dumb man. You know, it wasn't anything like that, but it was intense. It wasn't like excuse me, sir, do you mind if we chat for a second about what you did wrong on that play? He got after a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the stuff that you love to hear. Now it's, can you be that guy in the safety room that week in and week out can be the dependable person in that moment, in big games when the lights are the brightest? We've seen it in spurts. Vince, to your point, now that Xavier Watts is gone, can you be that person from, game 1 to game 15 or 16? And that's, the big question for Adon Shuler coming in.
Yeah. For me, I don't have any questions about the leadership aspect of it. It's, can you be the playmaker that Xavier was? And can you maintain your level of play now that people are now looking more at you than they were a year ago? Adon will be a great leader, but does the leadership impact his playmaking ability? Can he take his game to another level? All those things factor into, or is he just one of those guys that just grows up fast and then just hits his peak early and then just kind of stays there? If he does, that's fine. He's still a good football player. If all he does is repeat what he did last year, he's a good football player. Not everybody progresses every single year, and so that's why it's still a question of what else is in the tank for Adon as far as a player. I think it's a fair question.
Speaking of what's in the tank, I think another question that we have to ask going into the fall is about Jalen Stroman and what he's going to be able to bring to the table and how quickly he's going to get up to speed, especially coming off the injury, all of those different things. I mean, he was brought in, he's a fifth-year senior, right? So he was brought in here to be in the rotation, to be potentially a starter, depending on how things shake out. That's the expectation. How quickly is he going to be able to get up to speed and all of those things, Brian? I think that, is a big question. And we haven't seen him in a Notre Dame uniform yet. So what's that going to look like?
Well, I think those are all great questions. And that's going to have a big impact on how good the safety room is. You need Jalen Stroman to at least be a good part of your rotation. You need that. If you lose that, if you don't get that, then all of a sudden we're talking about a very inexperienced safety room. I know Luke Touch has played a lot of special team snaps, but running down on kickoff is not the same as trying to cover Miami's receivers or BC's receivers or Texas A&M's receivers or guys like that. It's a very different animal. And so I think you need Jalen to kind of force his way into the rotation. I do. I think that's a very vital part to this team having success in the secondary is him being the run defender he was a couple years ago, being healthy, and then showing that he's got coverage skill. I think it's part of the reason he left Virginia Tech is, look, dude, I'm just a one-trick pony here. I need to be able to play in a system that allows me to do everything. And the Notre Dame secondary, certainly, the safety position, certainly, you just can't be a run stopper only at Notre Dame. You've got to be able to do a little bit of everything. Some guys they may use more in a certain role than others, but you got to be able to do it all.
Yeah, I think Jalen Stroman's emergence in fall camp is really what's going to establish the floor of the safety room, because that's the unknown. And I'd say that's the biggest unknown, because it's a lot of projection of, hey, look what he did in 2023. And, Mike Mickens wouldn't have went out and got him if he didn't have faith. And all of those things can be true while also saying it is an unknown of how he's going to get adjusted. We're going to find out really quickly what his absence in the spring meant. It's either not going to be that big of a hiccup because he was a part of team meetings and a part of install, but not on, a part of the on the field type of game. So we're going to get that answered really quickly in fall camp. I don't think it's going to be that big of a hindrance, but it's still a question because we don't have the answer to it.
One of the guys we talked about earlier in Luke Talich, and he's like the second oldest guy in the room. And, again,
for Notre Dame, he's actually the oldest.
Well, yeah, that's been on the roster.
He played more than Adon Shuler did as a freshman on spec. He's been so like Luke Talich is not a redshirt sophomore. He's a true junior eligibility wise because he was a starter on special teams as a true freshman.
Yeah,
Adon was not.
Right. So he's been here. He's been around. This is it's kind of a make or break season as far as if he's going to be at safety, right? 100%. Like if he's going to be a starter at safety, or if he's just going to be, I don't want to say just going to be, because I don't want it to sound like I'm undercutting what his role has been up to this point, because he's out. They thought enough of him that they didn't redshirt him. I guess that's the best. That's ultimate compliment, right? And so, is he going to be more than that and be a starter on defense, or is he going to continue that role? That's a big question, And this is the fall camp where we're going to find that out for Luke, because this time next year, all those other guys we talked about are going to have another year under their belt, and be ready to roll.
Well, I think you made a great point, Vince. We're just talking safety here,
right?
Luke Talich is going to be a 4-year starter on special teams for Notre Dame,
right?
If Luke Talich is your fifth safety and doesn't play a lot of safety this year, he's still going to have a shot to be a captain next year because of like Bo Bauer was in his last year.
Great point. Great example.
But can he make an impact at safety? That's the question. And it's not that there's no question that Luke Talich has the ability to play at safety for Notre Dame. But so does Jalen Stroman, so does Bronte Johnson, so does Jadon Blair, so did Kennedy Urlacher. Not everybody can play. You can't play 5-6 guys every game. It's just too much. There's some games you can do that. Purdue, hopefully. Navy, hopefully. I shouldn't have said that about Navy because now they're going to make me look stupid for saying that. But, you just hope that there's those blowout games where he's able to get on the field, like Florida State last year. But I do think that, to your point, though, if he can't beat out Bronte Johnson and Jadon Blair now, what's to make us believe he's going to somehow do it next year when they get more experience? So barring injury to one of them. So I think your point is fair for safety, that this is a bit of a make or break year for Luke Talich to become something on defense, whether it's a rotation guy, whether it's a starter, whether it's a heavy rotation guy, a light rotation guy. We don't know the answer to that, but this is a very important period for Luke because you are battling with younger players outside of Jalen Stroman. So even if you don't start, Jalen Stroman does, that number 3 guy is still going to play a ton. And if you don't have that role, that means you got passed up by somebody younger than you. It's not possible that somebody older than you passed you up for the number 3 spot. You might get passed up for the number 2 spot, meaning when I say 1, 2, 3, I'm talking about Adon's 1, who's 2, who's 3, that kind of thing. So the number 2 guy is going to start. The number 3 guy is going to be that rotation guy.
Right.
That's the question mark for Luke Talich.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Trev, kind of along those lines, giving guys extra years and all of those kinds of things, what are we going to get? What is Notre Dame going to get from the next group down, right? As far as age is concerned. So some of these younger guys that we already talked about, what are they going to get?
High ceiling guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. What are they going to get from those guys for the 24 season? I feel like we're talking
and why
about,
does it matter? Right?
100%. Yeah. I feel like we know what their ceiling is and their ceiling at Notre Dame, what it could be. Can they start knocking on that ceiling a little bit in 25, or is that a 26 conversation? So what are they going to get from those guys this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the young guys in the room, specifically Tate Johnson and Jadon Blair, is what going to take this safety group to a good group to an elite group.
That's fair.
And because you think about if Adon Shuler is just who he was last year, good safety room. If Jalen Stroman's able to replicate what he was at Virginia Tech when he was healthy, it's a good safety room. But that's kind of the difference between what Notre Dame was in 2023 at safety and then what they were at 2024 at safety. Then, once you start to unlock the depth in the room, I am of the belief that Notre Dame is going to rotate a little bit more because as of right now, they don't have a Xavier Watts on the safety depth chart that should be on the field 93% of the defensive snaps. One, based on Adon Shuler's style of play, based on Jalen Stroman's style of play, I don't know from a health perspective I would want them filling the alley and laying these, intense hits down in the box 93% of the times of snaps on defense. You're just naturally going to need more rotation because of the playing style of these guys. But this room can't be what it is if your two highest ceiling players, arguably in the room, don't take that next step and it begins in fall camp. These are the two guys that impact the ceiling the most. I think Jalen Stroman's going to impact the floor the most and where this room is going to be at a bare minimum standpoint. But I think that Tay Johnson and Jadon Blair is what's really going to take this group from a top 10 to 12 safety room to like that top 5 to 7 safety room at the end of the season.
The final question is,
I'm sorry. I think that's a great point.
Oh, yeah, hit it.
I think, Trev, they don't need those two guys to have a top 10 safety room. They need one of those two to break out at least if this is going to be a top 5 safety room.
Yep.
I think that's a great point.
This final question is, it might shock some people. I'll just say it. It might shock some people based on who is not in the room that was in the room last year, right? In Xavier Watts.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? But the final question that we want to kind of toss around here is, Brian, can the safety position actually be better in 2025?
So you started that intro, and I'm like, well, I came up with the questions, and I don't remember any of them being, like, shocking. I was like, I thought they're pretty fair questions. Like,
I think if you went up to the average Notre Dame fan and been like, look, Xavier Watts is gone, they're going to be better.
I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I get it. I'm laughing because, like, in my head, I'm not thinking that's shocking. But then when I hear you say it out loud, like, a room without Xavier Watts is going to be better. Like, okay, yeah, I get it. Okay, that's a bold claim.
It is a bold claim. Yeah.
That's the question mark. And it's not so much, okay, they're going to have someone that's going to be better than Xavier. It's about the room as a whole. Is Adon Shuler improved? Is the other position this? Is the third guy that? And it's more so about the overall level of play from the room as opposed to one individually great player and a second pretty good player. It's also just about overall the type of production. Can it be a better run defending unit? That's a big part of this too, is this defense has to get better against the run. Well, with Jalen Stroman and with Luke Talich joining Adon Shuler, that's actually something that I think should happen because of what their strengths are. But can you do that without sacrificing a lot in the pass game? That's where you then have the counter argument of, well, I don't know if that makes them better against the run, but is the improvement in the run game diminished by you're even worse by a greater margin in the pass game? I think that's what makes this a question mark, because there's one of 3 ways this can go, and I'm going to be Captain Obvious for a second, Vince. 1 is they're not as good as they were last year. 2 is they're as good as they were last year, just looks different. Or 3, they're better. I think the most likely option is they're not as good or they're better. I don't know that as good is going to be the same because of the different type of skill set that we're seeing in the room this year. I just that's where I'm like, I don't know that it's going to be stagnant. It's either going to regress, or as a whole, the room is better. Even if you don't have that one individually great player that you had. I mean, like, Xavier Watts is one of the best to ever do it at Notre Dame at safety. Like, that's just a fact. And statistically, it's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
He was a 2-time All-American.
Right, the hardware.
The last Notre Dame DB to do that was Todd Light, who played corner. They've never had a safety that's been a 2-time All-American. Like, when you're doing things like that at Notre Dame, that's impressive. But just because he's not there doesn't mean your room as a whole can't get better. And that's where I think sometimes we can say, okay, well, yeah, you lost that 1-star player, but the group got better. The unit got better. I mean, the Notre Dame offensive line was better in 2024 than it was in 2023, in my opinion. So they got better after Joe Alt left. Did they get better because Joe Alt left? No. The unit as a whole was better. And then you say, well, like, imagine if this guy came back. Yeah, we can have that conversation, but it's more so about just the entirety of the team. Can they be more impactful in all areas? those are all things that you ask and say, and there's a chance for it to get there. It's more likely as of today that there's some regression based on the lack of experience. But the talent plus the depth makes it to where there's a potential for it to be better. And that's one of those questions that we're gonna find out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting to talk about. Because two things can be true. It is true right now that they don't have a proven commodity in the room that can have the same type of game impact that what Xavier Watts had. The clutch factor, the big play, lights are the brightest type of moments. But it's also fair to say that there's players in the room physically that can do things that Xavier Watts never could because he wasn't 6'5", 200 pounds. And that's the exciting state of what this room is, which is why it's not a ludicrous question, but it is still a question because we got to see him do it. I can't confidently say, yes, they will be because they have a 6'4", a 6'2", a 6'5", and a 6'3" safety. But it's possible, that's what's crazy about this conversation.
Yeah, it is. It was kind of funny looking back when you're putting the depth charts together and you're thinking about different parts of the team and you start like, man, this doesn't look like your typical safety room. Like this isn't what we normally see. And we didn't pull up a depth chart for this particular show. But I'm actually going to bring it up now because I just think at this particular time, it's just kind of hilarious to kind of look at it. But when you look at this safety depth chart, it's like, is this like a backcourt for the basketball team? Like seriously, the Notre Dame safeties are taller than Notre Dame's backcourt on their Division I basketball team. Yep. And I'm not saying that as an insult to the basketball team because Notre Dame has one of the best returning guards in all of college basketball next year. But look at that. I mean, 6'1", 6 foot, 6'2", 6'5", 6 foot, 6'3", 6'4", 6 foot, 6'1". Not a single 5 on there, except for the 5 at the end of Jadon Blair being 6'5".
Yeah, and I can promise you that the guard you were referring to, his height starts with a 5. I don't care what it says.
Oh, 100%.
I don't care what it says on Notre Dame's roster.
Right.
It says he's 6 foot tall.
So, I mean, you're talking about Jalen Stroman, who's a good-sized kid coming to Notre Dame, and he's not even in your top 4 of height.
Yeah,
at safety. Like that's impressive. That's impressive. And Tay Johnson looks a little bit more than just 6 foot flat. He looks closer to like 6'2.5". So there's definitely some height there. And of course, we've all stood next to Jadon. So, and Ethan Long is tall. Luke Talich is tall. And Ethan Long at 6'3" normally is one of your tallest players. He's 3rd right now. And like that, just the length of that unit is really impressive. It really is. It's an athletic group. And there's guys that are not going to play this year that in 2 years ago would have like been no-brainer rotation guys, if not starters, which is kind of crazy to think about.
It's a whole new world, Brian. It's a whole new world at the safety position.
Welcome to the Marcus Freeman, Mike Mickens era.
Yeah, seriously.
Yep.
Yeah, you're not kidding. So one of the things that we like to do when talking about a position group is talk about kind of some intriguing matchups that are upcoming on the schedule. And I'll throw it to Trevor first. And Trevor, you get the layups. You get to talk about the obvious ones that are going to be good matchups. Yeah, exactly. Just hold it. Just, the obvious 2 matchups at the beginning of the season. So I'll just toss it to you, my friend, the 2 matchups to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, one opening game down in Miami, you have Carson Beck, who we've seen back-to-back years at Georgia be willing to push the ball down the field vertically. And like we talked about earlier in the show, the safeties are the last line of defense. And so that's going to be a big test week 1 on the road, more so a big test also in terms of experience. Yes, you have Jalen Stroman, who played in the ACC, and Adon Shuler played on the biggest possible stage that you can play on in college football last season. But we also believe that they're going to use a safety rotation. Jadon Blair has yet to step foot on a collegiate football field in a game. Luke Talich's biggest on-the-field performance in big games has been on special teams. Still in the moment, but it's not as magnified as what it is.
Yeah, like his pick 6 against Florida State did not come with the same pressure as him running down on punt return and drilling somebody. I mean, it just didn't. It was completely different. It's 45-3. It's like
exactly.
Okay,
but he has performed in both scenarios. It's just this is a different scenario.
Yeah. Yep, it's just a different beast. And then with Bronte Johnson, it's the same discussion of, yes, he played in moments. Once he got healthy last season, he worked his way into the 2 deep at corner. but being on the field on a third down in South Beach under the lights in Hard Rock Stadium is a little bit different of an animal than, hey, if Leonard Moore goes down, I'm your guy. You know what I mean?
Different.
Very different. And then Texas A&M is also in there as well. One, it's home opener. You're under the lights again against a team that you faced last season. But this is now an offense that now has skilled players that fit what the offensive coordinator wants to do. And I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic this season with Colin Klein.
Home openers haven't exactly been a wonderful thing for Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman's tenure.
No.
They're 1-2, and their only win was over an FCS program.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Correct. And
they haven't exactly lost to Ohio State and Alabama in their home openers. It's Marshall and I don't even want to say it. I can't even say it.
And the other one. And the other one. But it's going to be a big test because it's not very often do you kind of find a lot of answers out about your team in back-to-back games. And I know it may sound like a broken record through some of the position previews we've talked about, but Notre Dame has a unique opportunity in front of them to answer a lot of early season questions in back-to-back games. A lot of it is, you got Ohio State who opens up against Texas, and then you kind of play a bunch of and then like in game 4 or 5, it's okay, now they get tested again. For Notre Dame, you have to wait 14 days.
Right.
And there's not a game in between those two. And so I'm really excited to watch that unfold. But yes, those two are going to be some of the biggest, but I know that we have some more coming at the pipe as well.
Yeah, I think when you look at the safeties, there's 2 big games for me, and they're back-to-back, and it's NC State and USC. And for NC State, it's good luck covering Justin Jolly. Like, that's your assignment for the week. That's, to me, and you could even throw Boise State in there as a 3-game stretch because they've got the Louder kid, the big old tight end, and the safeties are going to be matched up against him at times. So I think that stretch is also going to be important. And just as cover players, I think that stretch is going to tell us a lot more about this unit even than the first 2 games. I think the first 2 games, guys, for me, it's more about showing yourselves. We know nothing about you. These are big games, big moments. Are you going to step up and be playmakers? I don't think the matchup is as challenging for them, the uniqueness of the matchup. Like A&M might have been a tougher matchup for the safeties last year from a tight end standpoint. Now, I think the slot receivers are going to be more dangerous and the receivers are going to be more dangerous. But as far as like the tight end matchup, but you get into that Boise State to USC stretch, and there's not only slot receivers and receivers you've got to handle, but those are some pretty darn good tight ends you got to handle. You got to cover. And then with USC, there was a lot of mistakes from the safety room last year, some of which that made people think the cornerbacks were the ones messing up. They've got to play smarter football. And then obviously Laken McCree is not the tight end that the other 2 guys are from a volume standpoint, but he's a clutch guy. He's a guy that I think when that offense is humming is going to be more of a crucial playmaker in certain situations. And you've got to be able to step up and handle him too. And then, of course, in the run game, those teams present some unique matchups as well. So I think that's the next stretch for me that's going to tell us a lot about how good the safety room is going to be for Notre Dame.
Anything else jump out to you, Trevor, on the schedule?
The only other one for me is Pitt because of what they like to do with their running backs in the pass game. I think that's going to be another interesting dynamic for Notre Dame's safety room. You got a skill set of guys that can come down, fly downhill, and fill the alley. I've talked a lot about Eli Holstein. Pitt's season kind of rests on his shoulders from a health perspective, and if he can build on what he did last year. But if so, they have returning experience at wide receiver. I know that's going to be an interesting test for them, but for me, it's around what they bring back in the backfield. I know we talked about Notre Dame safeties need to be a little bit better in run support this year. And Brian and I both believe that Desmond Reed is one of the top 5 running backs returning in college football next year, let alone on Notre Dame's schedule. So that one's going to be another test. A little bit different than what the USCs and NC States and Miami's and Texas A&Ms are going to present, but that'll be a different type of test and colder weather on the road against Pitt at the end of the year. That's going to be another big one.
It's time for one of my favorite segments of the show, and that is the bold predictions. And anybody that's here for the first time or listening for the first time, bold predictions is something that we like to do about each position group, and it's meant to be rooted in reality, but it's also supposed to be fun. These aren't things that are necessarily that we're not guaranteeing that they're going to happen or anything. These are bold. They're bold for a reason. And some of us, do a good job with that homework assignment at times, and some of us don't. And that's just, kind of how it goes. And I'm just going to throw that out there. You know, it's time. It's time for bold predictions, guys. And I know that sometimes we do team one, sometimes there's individual one, sometimes there's both. I don't know what we're going to get. So I'm going to throw it to Trevor first, and you get to do your bold prediction first, sir.
Yeah, my player prediction, I think that Bronte Johnson's going to lead the safety room in interceptions this year.
Nice.
I think that there have been some scenarios. He's generating a little bit more buzz now, but I think he's kind of suffering from the middle child syndrome a little bit when it comes to the safety discussion.
Great. Never thought of that. That's really good.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of
really good.
A lot of the attention, rightfully so, goes to Adon Shuler, Jalen Stroman, the vet that comes in. Luke Talich has been around the program for a while. And then the youngest child, Jadon Blair, the exciting 6'5" guy. But Tay Johnson's emergence in the spring, showing how much of a well-rounded guy that he is, I think that's going to present the coaching staff with a lot of different opinions on how to use him. And I think he's going to become an interception merchant on third down. I really do, for how athletic he is. He's a very rangy guy. Would it surprise me at all if Jadon Blair or one of the other guys inserts himself into that discussion? Absolutely not. But for my bold prediction individually, I think that Bronte Johnson's going to lead the safety room in interceptions this year.
Nice. Do you have a team one? Or are you going only?
I don't. It's tough because where I ran into an issue with the team one is because the rotation is such out in the open. I bounce back and forth with some, but I could never land on just one.
I love it. I'm going to go next because mine is more of a team one than it is an individual one. And I
was going to tell you to go next anyway because I don't hear you crying.
I know.
I took your bold prediction like you did last week.
That's what I was going to do. That's why I went. That's why I was going to go next. But he set me up perfectly because I was going back and forth on some individual ones. And it's like, well, I don't know who's all going to play. And so making a bold prediction, I mean, it would be very bold, especially if the guy doesn't play, whoever that may be. You know what I mean? So I was kind of going back and forth on some individual ones. So I kind of went with a team one. And what I think is there is not going to be a set starter across from Adon Shuler, and I think that's a good thing. I'm saying that the competition is going to be so good that all of these guys are going to get on the field and play a significant amount of time, and you might see a different starter depending on who they're going up against and thing. I think it might be more, strategic decision making as to who starts from one game to the next, depending on the offense that they're going up against. And again, I think that's a good thing. That's not a, well, crap, who are we going to start this week? I think it's a, hey, you know what? His skill, these guys have all been balling and his skill set is the best. And so we're going to put him in against this team or vice versa. And you get a nice rotation going there.
I think, Trev, to your point, Vince, to your point too, I think that also is something that bears discussion as far as what can make this unit better than it was last year's, because you do have some different types of players, and we didn't really spend any time talking about that specifically. Like, we talked about the different types of players, but the point that if you're playing a run-heavy team, you've got looks that you can go with to give you run-dominant players. If you're playing a team that wants to spread it out, maybe put you in some more pass game looks, you have some guys that you can put in and match up a little bit better in those situations, whether it's 2 safety looks or 3 safety looks. And that's a great situation to be in if you're Notre Dame, as far as talent-wise. Now, those guys got to step up and prove it. But
100%.
Yeah, that's great. It's great. I was not going to steal your one this week, then.
I didn't think you would.
I just have player predictions for this unit, and that is Notre Dame will have a regular All-American and a freshman All-American at the safety position this year. Something we have not seen, I don't believe. I don't know that I've ever seen that in my lifetime, because I don't think Kyle Hamilton was a freshman All-American. He might have been, but I don't remember if he was. And neither one of the two veterans earned All-American honors that year as well. There's a better chance that Kyle ended up being a freshman All-American, and I just forgot, than the other two. But I think Adon Shuler will end up being an All-American this season. I think he's going to take his game to another level. I think he's going to be a big-time clutch playmaker. I think Notre Dame is starting to get a reputation where people have their eyes on the safeties at Notre Dame more. I'm shocked he's not getting more preseason recognition, to be honest with you, especially when Phil Steele has like 9 team All-American teams. Like, it seems like he's like, what, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. It's a little nuts. You're telling me he's not even in the top 10 of your safeties. So I'm a little surprised by that. But as soon as he starts making plays in the first 2 games, people are going to look at that and say, okay, that guy's legit. That's their next great safety. But I also feel that either Jadon Blair or Bronte Johnson will also earn freshman All-American honors, because Bronte Johnson on the All-American team still qualifies as a freshman. My prediction today is that it's Adon Blair. But I think one of those two has that breakout season as a freshman or redshirt freshman. Now, again, I don't like having non-true freshmen as All-American caliber players, but that's the rules with some of those lists. So I'm going to go with Adon Blair being my prediction, but it won't shock me if it's Bronte Johnson, to Trev's point. And if Trevor's right, then my prediction, if Trevor's bold prediction is right, then mine will, at least from the freshman standpoint. But right now I'm going with Adon Blair. Heck, it could end up being both, you know, but
depending on how it shakes down for sure. Kyle Hamilton was a freshman All-American. I did look that up. And then his junior year, he was an actual.
I knew he was an actual All-American in 2021, which I still believe to be ridiculous that he earned All-American honors that year.
He played half a year.
It's 7 games.
Yeah.
Like, it's good for Notre Dame, but it's like the dude played 7 games.
Right.
So
it tells you how much people pay attention. And
but also tells you how bad it was at, like, big-time safeties in 2021 as well.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
And that's not me hating on Kyle Hamilton. I was a huge Kyle Hamilton.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just if it was somebody else's team, I'd be like, that's ridiculous that Caleb Downs was the first team All-American and he only played 7 games.
Right.
See the best safety in the country? Yeah, but you can't be an All-American when you miss half the season.
Right.
So it's, especially when it's the second half. It'd be one thing if like he missed the first 5-6 games, came back and dominated and led Notre Dame to the playoff or something like that. He didn't do that.
Right.
So yeah, that was a frustrating. That was like, come on, let's be honest.
Right.
If it happened to anyone other than Notre Dame player, we'd all be like, that's bull crap that a guy that played 6 or 7 games was an All-American. Come on.
That's facts.
And I think he was a consensus or All-American as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he made one team.
No, it's consensus.
It's like, what? Yep. What were the other safeties in college football that year? Like, seriously.
And then the year that he played a full season, he was just all ACC. He wasn't an All-American.
It should have been an All-American that year. But
so it's like, yeah.
So maybe they felt bad about screwing him out of one in 2020, so they gave him one in 2021.
It's like the Bobby Bowden rule.
A mea culpa. Hey, we should have made you an All-American because he was a much better all-around player in 2020 than he was in 2021.
100%. Yeah.
I mean, just go ask Cincinnati.
Right. Seriously. All right, fellas. Well, that's going to do it for our safety preview for Notre Dame going into 2025. Don't go anywhere, though. We still have more show to go. But in the meantime, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and, of course, jump on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I said it earlier in the show. There's a great breakdown of Sullivan Absher, some video breakdown. You want to check that out, but only if you're a member. And that's the only place you're going to find it. So you definitely want to head over there. If you want to watch a little film in July, I mean, what really, folks? What else?
There's a lot more coming. I gave Trev my breakdown. I'm 8 games into a 16-game breakdown. I'm doing everything over again. I've learned some things about the Notre Dame run game, about what they call not what they call certain things, but like they've got a little bit more to their run game than we thought going into the season. Gotcha. So I'm going to break that down statistically with video and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be awesome.
There's only one place on the planet where you can find that information, and that's at our premium message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Now is the time. Do not wait. Do not hesitate. That is where you want to be. So definitely check that out, everybody. Appreciate you hanging out with us. Stay tuned.
Before we move on to the next section, I want to bring the super chat that we got up now because it's Notre Dame related. So before we move away from Notre Dame and start talking about BC, I did want to bring up this super chat from Patrick. So he says, IB team. Oh, you go and read it, Vince. But hey, I really appreciate that super chat, Patrick. That was very, very kind of you.
Yeah, appreciate it very much. And it says, IB team. If I remember correctly, the last 2 quarterbacks a few years back Notre Dame was down to were Buckner and McCarthy. Reese wanted Buckner. How different are things now if Notre Dame chose McCarthy instead of Buckner? Appreciate all of you. And we appreciate you, Patrick.
Couple things. I don't know that it's a whole lot different because I still feel like people want to say, well, they got it wrong. I don't think they got it wrong. I think they went through some unfortunate circumstances. With Tyler Buckner not getting to play as a senior because he lives in a state that didn't allow them to play high school football in 2020. because of all the craziness and stuff that was going on in the world at the time, and a guy that hired the wrong quarterback coach, and that hurt his development. And then he had some injuries at Notre Dame that hurt his development. I don't think they made the wrong decision at the time. Sometimes you can make the right decision. It just doesn't pan out for you. It just doesn't. It ends up not like working out the way that you hope it works out. But I felt at the time it was the right decision, and I still feel that way. I also don't think J.J. McCarthy could have won at Notre Dame playing the way that he won at Michigan, because the quarterback at Notre Dame needed to carry this team more than the quarterback at Michigan needed to carry that team in 2023. It's no given that Notre Dame would have developed him as well as Jim Harbaugh did either. I mean, Jim Harbaugh's got a much better track record of developing quarterbacks than Notre Dame does. And so I don't know how it would have turned out. And how would he have gotten hurt at Notre Dame the way Tyler did? I don't know. I don't know the answer to those questions. And so that's why I say, like, I would think that injuries alone would have resulted in J.J. McCarthy being a better player than what Tyler Buchner was for Notre Dame. That's my guess. Would that have been enough for him to, be the starter and, be the guy? He didn't have as good of a supporting cast around him in 2023 at Notre Dame as he did at Michigan. Just didn't. Better O-line, for the most part, better pass catchers, at least more experienced pass catchers in 2023. And better, in some ways, a better defense. If we're being honest, that was a better defense in 2023 as well, and a much easier schedule.
I was going to say the schedule definitely plays into that. Yeah.
But sure. Look, J.J. McCarthy led them to a win, and Notre Dame's quarterbacks did not. And I mean, they played Ohio State in 2023 and beat Ohio State in 2023. So there were common opponents, and you can look at and say, hey, look, man, like that obviously meant something. And look, if the Notre Dame offense would have done as well in 2023 as the Michigan offense did in 2023 against Ohio State, Notre Dame wins that football game. They scored 30 points that game. Notre Dame scored 14. So that's kind of my thing, guys, is I look at it. Notre Dame, yards-wise, it was similar. Yards per play was similar. Notre Dame was 5.5. Michigan was 5.6. But you know what Michigan did that Notre Dame couldn't do? Put the ball in the freaking end zone. That's what they did. And so who knows how it would have turned out. I think it's a fair question, Patrick. Mm-hmm. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it because it is what it is. And I don't like to criticize the staff when they, even if we admit that it was the wrong decision, I don't like to criticize the staff for decisions that were quote unquote wrong when I also was wrong. Because I also thought that it was the best decision to go for Buchner. So I'm not going to retroactively look back and be like, man, those guys were idiots. Could you imagine if they would have gone and got, J.J. McCarthy? Well, like, Brian, didn't you also like Tyler Buchner better? No, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what? Huh? No way. I did. And I still think at the time it was the right decision. It's just unfortunately Tyler just couldn't stay healthy. The way it all panned out. Yeah. Tyler was special.
He was.
He couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah.
And my bigger question is what happens if Tyler Buchner doesn't get hurt against Marshall? Because let's remember, he missed the next 2 months of the season, came back and lit South Carolina up. Yes, he turned it over. I get that. But, like, that kid made a ton of plays in that game.
Yes, he did.
Like, Tyler and his family, he had some bad luck, and they made some bad decisions. Like moving to the quarterback coach that did all the things to mess up his motion, transferring to Alabama. We said at the time, look, first of all, you should have stayed at Notre Dame, number one. Number two, if you didn't want to be at Notre Dame, you should have gone to Stanford or somebody like that, not Alabama. He just made unfortunately, some bad decisions. And it hurt his career, where J.J. McCarthy went to a place with a coach that had a proven track record of developing quarterbacks. He was developed. They were patient with him, and he was in a system where he didn't have to go win them a bunch of football games. He just had to make sure they didn't lose them. I mean, guys, in 2023, they went on the road and beat a top 10 team in a game where J.J. McCarthy threw a grand total of 0 passes in the second half of that game. And not like the same way Riley Leonard didn't throw a pass against Purdue because he didn't play. He played the whole second half, and they just never threw the ball. Not one pass did they throw in that game. That's not happening in 2023 at Notre Dame against a team with a pulse. It just isn't. They could have done that against Stanford. They're not doing that against a good team. And that's the difference too. Yeah. I also want to say this because I get asked this a lot before we move on to the BC thing. People say they notice the Believe thing in our thing. It's down there. So Believe is who we partner with for our podcast. So Believe is the company that sells ads and helps us monetize our podcast. And they're a great partner of ours. I love being with Believe. It was a decision I went back and forth about for months, as Vince very well knows, but ultimately decided to go with them. And I'm very, very happy about it. But that's what that is they are our partner in the podcast. So like we put out the content, they create the platform to host our content, they sell the ads. So that's who Believe is. So yeah, just to make sure. Final part of our show today, guys, is we're going to continue our preview series of Notre Dame's 2020-25 opponents. And Notre Dame, after they play USC, has a bye week, and then they come out of that bye, and they are heading to the East Coast to take on the Boston College Eagles, who play in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. I just love saying that because they don't actually play in Boston. But this is one of Notre Dame's many rivals. This is a game that is going to be a very important game for both teams. BC goes into year 2 of the Bill O'Brien era, fellas, and we're going to break down the Eagles. This is going to be a focus on this team, not the matchup with Notre Dame. And when we look at this Eagles team, fellas, Vince, it's I'll be honest with you, they were better last year than I thought they were going to be as we kind of kick this thing off and we start talking about who Boston College is. But as you go into this year 2 of the Bill O'Brien era, I'll tell you, I'm more optimistic about this team going into year 2 than I thought I would have been, because I wondered how good the fit was going to be with Bill O'Brien at Boston College. I wondered if like the not just the fit of him there, but also the fit of the players that he had to him. And we're better than I expected. They went through their ups and downs last season, and we'll break all that down. But I look at this, fellas, and I say this is a team that, for me, last season really surprised me and was better than I thought. And Bill O'Brien showed an ability to adapt for a while that I didn't know that he really had in him, and took him to a bowl game and were a couple blown stops in the second half from winning a couple more games. They should have beat Louisville last year. Man, they threw that game away. They should have beat Louisville last year. So I was impressed with the job that Bill O'Brien did in year 1. Now the question is, guys, let's kind of recap year 1 and look into year 2 is, can they take this to another level? That's going to be the next question for them.
Look, I think your reservations were accurate. They were on point when he took that job. I think we were all kind of like, huh, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Good luck with that.
Right. And in year 1, I think you can, exit year 1 thinking things were positive and are headed in the right direction. I still think the jury's out as to whether, Bill O'Brien's the right choice at Boston College. I think, again, the trajectory is headed in the right direction, but you know how college is, man. Like the NFL almost feels like there's a reset every year. Like college almost I guess it's changing a little bit, but college is more blended from year to year to year. And I feel like, okay, let's see what happens in year 2 and then year 3 and kind of where things go from a recruiting standpoint and all that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very fair.
But with that said, I do think he did a good job in year 1.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so let's see what happens in year 2.
I do know what you mean, Vince, but I think that's also a very fair thing. Is I'm messing with you, but
I know I keep saying
you can look at it and say, well, he did much better in year 1 than I thought he was going to do. I did not think they were going to make a bowl game last year, and they did make a bowl game last year. And you look at the different things about it, but it's also like, okay, they beat Florida State at Florida State. That team ended up stinking.
Right.
Had a close win over Michigan State by 4 points at home. Michigan State was 5-7. They had a 1-point home win at home against Western Kentucky. They ended up being like a not very good 8-6 caliber team. Lost at Virginia, lost at Virginia Tech, beat Louisville, lost at SMU, beat a mediocre to bad North Carolina team, beat a Pitt team that was reeling and banged up at the time, and then had the one good win they had was at home where they upset Syracuse in a big win. So, and then they lost their bowl game to Nebraska. So you say, like, okay, they were also a couple plays. You're talking about how they were a couple plays from being better. And well, I could point to a couple plays away where they were maybe worse. And I think that's where you kind of get into year 2 is, okay, which way do they go? this great first year. This is a very encouraging first year, but now that people kind of know what you're going to do schematically and they know your players and that kind of stuff, can you keep it going? And that is going to be a big question for this team as they go into kind of year 2 of Bill O'Brien. And this is the year, Vince, to your point, that I think we really find out just how good Bill O'Brien is as a coach, because of like what you said, is there is so much more that's going to be known. You can't, there's a lot of things about it. The schedule, there was no Clemson on last year's schedule. They have Clemson on this year's schedule. There's no Notre Dame on last year's schedule. So, but we're going to learn. I think it's fair to say we are going to learn a lot more about them this year than we did last year.
Yep, for sure.
Well, what I think made it so difficult to kind of evaluate Bill O'Brien's first year is I think I learned more about this team and their losses than I did who they beat. Yeah, and that's a weird spot to be in. I mean, even in their most lopsided loss, their 42-21 loss on the road to Virginia Tech, it was 28-21 going into the fourth quarter. And so this was a much more competitive football team than what their overall record says. They were 7-6, 4-4 in the ACC, but they played teams hard. And I think that's kind of what you want to establish in year 1 as a head coach, to kind of back your guys' point about what we need to see in year 2. And so that's what I think makes it harder to evaluate Boston College, is because I did learn more about this team and the losses than who they beat. And I think that's interesting spot to be in.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of do this for me, Trevor. Answer me this question as we're talking about this. How do you feel? How would you grade year 1 for Bill O'Brien at BC based on maximizing the talent, improvement throughout the season, like all the different things that go into what evaluate a football coach beyond recruiting, just as far as coaching the team that he had? How would you grade his first season there?
I'd give him B plus. I think he did a good job coaching this program. I do. I think he maximized the talent he had on his roster. I think despite what his former quarterback said about his own play at Boston College, I think that he was able to overcome some of the mistakes that Thomas Castellano would put them in. Look, at the end of the day, there's a reason why Boston College was either not making it in the fourth quarter or falling short in the fourth quarter. A lot of that was turnover-based and performance in the fourth quarter because of who they had under center. And I think this season they're going to have somebody that's more apt to run his offense.
I'm sorry. Can we talk about that for a second? Because that is an absolutely hilarious response, and you did it so subtly. But no, I think that is something where the biggest thing for me is where I give Bill O'Brien a lot of credit, is that he was able to win for a time with a quarterback that did not fit his system. And he did not I think he did a better job of adjusting to Thomas Castellanos than Kalen DeBoer did to Jalen Milroe.
Agreed.
And you guys know how much I feel, how high my opinion is of Kalen DeBoer, and how, look, I have a very high opinion of Bill O'Brien as a football coach. I just don't have a very high opinion of Bill O'Brien as Bill O'Brien. But, I mean, those are all things that kind of factor into the conversation. But, I mean, if you just look at as far as getting the most out of the roster, I agree. I think that this is a team that I don't know how much better you could have been last year than what they were. I think that's fair. Vince, do you have an opinion on this particular subject?
I think that if you just look at it on paper, they had the same record in 23 that they had in 24, but they had one additional win in conference. And obviously those in-conference wins are going to be more important than out-of-conference wins. So, I mean, he took a step in the right direction. And they were super competitive in the bowl game against a team now. I realize bowl games, if they're not the college football playoff, you can almost take them as a grain of salt, because some guys, there's a bunch of guys sitting out, and some of the teams are shells of themselves in these bowl games now, right? And so you take that for what it's worth, but they were competitive in that bowl game. And so I think they went into the offseason with a lot of positive feelings and how things were going. So I would agree. I was thinking, when you asked the question originally, the first thing that came to my mind is like B. Like, I think he did a solid job.
B to B plus is kind of where I'm at.
Yep. I think he did a solid job. And I think, let's see what happens this year, because I think the schedule gets harder. I think the non-conference schedule gets harder. I think the conference schedule is harder. So
yeah,
let's kind of see where things are trending now.
The other thing with that too, Vince, is I still feel like they had a giant missed opportunity with the loss to Virginia. In where that team, we could be having a very different conversation about their season if they would have been able to pull off that win and still have the win over Syracuse, and then also blowing the big lead. Wasn't it like 20-3 or something like that at one point in time against Louisville?
Yep.
Like they were up. Let me pull that up real quick. Louisville Boston College box score from last season, but they were up big. I'm thinking I'm watching the game thinking like, well, there goes Notre Dame's strength of schedule. It was 20-0 with less than 2 minutes left in the first half. And Louisville, and then BC went up again, middle of the third quarter, 27-10. And then Louisville scored the next 21 points unanswered, and they couldn't do anything. Like those were some missed opportunities that I'd say probably would say, okay, I'm going to go be here because you did miss some of those opportunities. You made up for one of those losses that you shouldn't have lost by beating Louisville. But I don't think the Pitt win was good enough because of how just much Pitt was struggling at the time, enough for me to say you balance both of them. That's what I say is I do think maybe you could have been a game better, but then you also say, well, maybe that's the team that they more were, and they actually played out of their, above their potential in some of those other games. So I think it's a fair counter to that.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this team a little bit. And, we've kind of talked about what happened last year and kind of moving into this year. Where do you guys see, with the, we can talk the schedule, obviously we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but then also with the schedule, what those expectations are going into the 25 season in year 2 of Bill O'Brien and where things need to be. Because I think, at least for me personally, a repeat performance of last year, I don't know that we're having the same conversation next July 22nd.
When you say repeat, do me a favor, tell me what you mean by a repeat performance, and because I may feel differently than you do, but I don't know which direction you're taking it. So are you saying if they go 7-6 again, that we're probably not as high on the job Bill O'Brien's doing next year? Is that what you mean?
Well, I would say 7-6 actually might be an improvement over last year because I think the schedule's harder.
That's why I'm asking. What do you mean?
And so I just mean by losing some of those games, those one possession type games that they lost last year. They got to put a couple of those in the win column. Now, I would also say that you also need to continue to win the games that you already won. Now, again, the schedule is a little bit more difficult. So on paper, it might look a little bit similar to last year, but I think they need to be more competitive and they need to win those last possession games. That's my thing.
I'll say what my expectations are, Trev, and tell me if you feel the same. I just feel like what we need to see from BC again this year is growth as a program on and off the field, meaning coaching and recruiting. That's what I need to see. And you can't take a step back record-wise. Because I think that's where I wanted to have you kind of answer the question, Vince, is because if they go 7-6 again, with anything, it's, well, how does the 7-6 get put together? That's always a question mark. But it's more so, okay, are you a better team than you were a year ago? You could be hey, man, you did a great job coaching this year. And say like Wisconsin could go 5-7 this year, and you're like, dude, they were better this year than they were last year because their schedule's so hard. And that's the thing for me is like, just don't regress record-wise while growing as a program. That's going to be a big key for me. Because when I look at Boston College, I mean, there's some talent there, but I also look at their, projected starting lineup guys, and I see a lot of, on offense especially, a lot of junior, sophomore, junior, there's a couple seniors, sophomore, a lot of guys that have eligibility to come back and really take this thing to another level. Because I think year 3 is where you're going to really see a jump under Bill O'Brien, but you just can't have that devastating year 2 step back that then stunts your ability to then take it to that next level the next year. So when I talk about expectations, that's it for me. And if you can improve upon last year's record with the schedule that they're going to play, and pull that up here in a second and look at that. But actually, let's just pull it up now. When you talk about expectations for the season, this is not going to be an easy go of it for Boston College, fellas. I mean, let's just look at the schedule now, and so we've hinted about it, but so people can kind of put some eyes to it. You've got your opener against Fordham. They're a bad FCS team. You're right in game 2. You're getting tested big time playing at Michigan State. We've talked a lot about the Spartans. I don't know about your opinion, Trev, or Vince, but Trev and I both think Michigan State's going to be a quality Big Ten team this year. Certainly a tough game on the road. You only beat them by 5 last year at home.
Let's put it this way. I'm buying stock in Michigan State. Okay. I am a fan of that hire that they made. I'm a fan of the young quarterback. I think he took some lumps last year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm buying Michigan State stock.
So we're all on the same page with the Spartans.
Yeah.
Then you play at Stanford. I mean, that's a team you should beat if you're Boston College, but that's not going to be a cakewalk playing that game on the road. So 2 of your first 3 games of the season are against P4 teams on the road. Then you have a bye. Then you come back and play a scrappy Cal team. I don't know what Cal is going to be this year. They were scrappy last year, but with all the portal comings and goings, I don't know what to make of that team. At least you get them at home. At Pitt on October 4th, that's going to be a real tough game. You got Clemson at home. That's going to be a really tough game. Guys, we could be sitting here talking about BC being 3-3, and you're like, dude, they've had a great start so far because they were able to – you lose to Clemson, lose to Pitt, lose to Michigan State. Well, not a great start, but like they play well, I should say, and still be 3-3 if you lose those games close. Then after that, you've got UConn at home, should win that one, but UConn was a quality team last year that went 9-4. Jim Moore is doing a great job with that football team. Then you're at Louisville. Then you're home against Notre Dame, home against SMU. So your first 2 games of November are against playoff teams from last year. Then you play a very underrated Georgia Tech team. You get a bye, and then you finish at Syracuse. That is a brutal schedule for Boston College. Brutal schedule. If he takes them back to a bowl game, that's a heck of a coaching job, as long as like the 6 wins aren't all like 30-plus point blowout losses. Vince, you nailed it. Be competitive in those games. Look, you're going to get blown out at least once. I'm sorry. It's probably going to happen. Between at Michigan State, at Pitt, home against Clemson, at Louisville, home against Notre Dame, home against SMU, home against Georgia Tech, there's a chance you're going to get whooped pretty good in a couple of them. That's 1 or 2 of them. That's fine. Bounce back. But that's a tough schedule, fellas, and not exactly the kind of schedule you want as you're looking to grow your team in year 2. But but your schedule is your schedule. So you got to figure it out, and you've got to be able to pull off a couple upset wins. So like expectations are, they're higher this year than they were last year. So and whatever you want to say about it, people look at record. People don't buy, like fans typically don't buy I know our record is worse, but we were actually a better team thing. Like I think we may do as analysts, just because it's more of a different type of an emotional reaction. But there's a world in which BC is 5-7, and they're probably a better team than they were a year ago. I'm not predicting they'll go 5-7, and we'll get into that later. But I think that's what's going to make this a challenging game. And if Bill O'Brien has more than 8 wins, he should be getting like if they're 8 in the regular season, if they're better 8-4 or better, he should at least be getting some votes for ACC Coach of the Year with that schedule.
Yeah, when I look at Boston College season this year, I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to have to put in work on the road, and then they're going to have to be super competitive at home. There's not a world where I see Boston College holding serve at home, not with the teams that they have to host. I think a successful season for them is they learn how to close against teams with relative talent to their roster. What I mean by that is you can't have a head-scratching loss to a really bad Virginia team like you had last year. You learn to close against teams that have a comparable makeup to your roster. I don't see a world today that they're finding ways to close against Clemson or against Notre Dame, or I just don't see that for them. But as long as they are competitive in those games, even if it ends up being somewhat of a blowout loss, You go and you look at the final score of what their game on the road against Virginia Tech was last year. And for all intents and purposes, 42-21, people look at that, to your point, Brian, about Vans, and they don't say that that's a competitive game. But if you dig a little deeper, it's 21-28 going into the fourth quarter. Do they have one of those at home in them against a Notre Dame, against a Clemson, against an SMU, against a Georgia Tech? Potentially. But you look at their schedule on the road, and they're going to have to be competitive. They play 5 games this season on the road. None of them are easy, but easier compared to who they have to host. And so that's going to be interesting for how that goes for them. But they're going to have to find a way to close in games against Cal, against an SMU team where we're unsure about what they're going to be. At Syracuse, find a way to close. But it's going to be an interesting season for them. That's for sure.
All right, well, let's jump into this team, fellas, and let's talk about it. And why not start on offense? Because that is where you're going to see the makeup of the head coach, right? I mean, that's who Bill O'Brien is. He's the offensive side.
He's going to win at BC. Right. He's going to have pretty good offenses.
100%. So has he set himself up to be better on offense? After year one, Brian.
Well, I mean, there's different ways to look at that, Vince. The first being, I actually think they showed some positive moments last season on offense, but it was difficult for them to really get the offense going because they just didn't have a quarterback for a chunk of the season that really fit their system. Finished the year averaging 28 points a game, finished the season averaging 365 yards, 5.3 yards per play. But they never really looked super comfortable early in the season. I mean, 3 of your first 5 games, you're sub 300 yards. And then they eventually made a move at quarterback to a player that I would argue has got less physical talent in Grayson James, but a player that is more suited to Bill O'Brien's offense. And that I would argue is also someone who has a little bit more of a team centric mentality than the quarterback that they had for most of the season. So I think that's a fair way to say it. But in their 4 games with Grayson James at quarterback, I would argue that was some of their best stretch of football that season offensively. I mean, they scored, they played SMU, North Carolina, Pitt, and Nebraska, the 4 games he started. He did come off the bench against Syracuse. But in those 4 games, fellas, they averaged 419 yards a game. Actually, that's not correct. I did the math. I did incorrectly there. I added a game twice. But they, in those 4 games, let me just get this correct, they averaged 391.5 yards per game. Consider that they only averaged 365 on the season. That's a significant jump. And you can say, well, who'd they play? Okay, it's a very fair answer. They played SMU, North Carolina, Pitt, and Nebraska. So it's not exactly like murderers row. This is a team that earlier in the year, offensively, fellas, had games of 298 yards against Missouri, 292 against Michigan State. They only went for 279 against Western Kentucky on offense. Only went for 319 against Virginia. So I think what you saw was twofold. One is players that were getting more comfortable in the system, which is a complex system. But you also saw a quarterback that just you could rally around and better fit the system second half of the year. Now, will Grayson James be the starter again? We'll talk about that in a second. Will he get beat out? But I think this is an offense that you need to be in it longer to thrive in. It's a complicated pro-style offense. I think Bill O'Brien did a pretty good job of tinkering it to fit Thomas Castellanos, but he widely made the decision to go to somebody else later in the year. And as you said, Trev, contrary to the quarterback's statements, he did not carry that team the way he thinks he did last season. But I think my expectations is you've got to grow on offense this year. And there's the tools there to get there. There's one big potential stumbling block, guys, but there's a lot about this BC offense that I like. The 2 question marks being, and we'll get into them, is who's your quarterback going to be in your offensive line? We'll talk about those in a second. I want to, but we'll talk about the offensive line a little bit. But I think that that first part or the second part is the big part. That's the big key. I've reached out to a guy I know that covers BC. Hey man, where's the quarterback battle at? He said, look, it's legitimately a battle, and it's between Grayson James, who started the last 4 games of the season last year, threw for 237, 192, 253, and 301 in those games. If you look at the last 5 games, he also came off the bench against Syracuse, went 5 of 6 for 51 yards, threw a touchdown pass in that game for them. But if you look at the last 5 games, fellas, he threw 5 touchdowns and 1 pick in those last 5 games. And the offense it worked better last year. It just did. The offense was just better. He came, like I said, he came off the bench against Syracuse and performed well. Through the touchdown pass in the fourth quarter that put them up 37-28 to kind of create that winning gap for them in a win over Syracuse. So I was impressed. I'm not a big Grayson James fan as far as like his talent, but I thought he did some things where, okay, like that's the type of quarterback that you need in the system. Now, can he hold off Dylan Lonergan? That's the question, because they're polar opposites. Grayson James is a veteran, savvy, smart, sound quarterback. Dylan Lonergan's a big-armed, athletic, stud talent that is raw as a quarterback. And my opinion is, if this team is going to reach their full potential, you need Dylan Lonergan at quarterback. I love this kid's talent. Now, he's raw, but I love his talent. At the same time, when you have the margin for error there's going to be an attraction to playing the guy that you know what you're going to get. Trust your system and your talented receivers and go that route because he's going to have fewer mistakes. That's going to be a tough question mark for Bill O'Brien. My personal opinion is start Dylan Lonergan, be willing to maybe take some early lumps, because if you start him early and he's the quarterback I think he is, you're going to pull off a couple upsets late that will make up for maybe dropping that game against Michigan State or something like that early. So that's where I would go, just as an outsider viewing the talent. I can't tell you who outperformed who in the spring. I just would kind of bet on the ceiling, because you're I don't know. Grayson James is going into his 5th year. Dylan Lonergan still has multiple years of eligibility left. That'd factor into it as well. But you also need to have Dylan Lonergan win the job, because if he thoroughly gets outplayed by Grayson James and you still start him anyway, that's how you can lose your locker room. So it's more of a fingers crossed. You hope it's close. If it's close, I'm starting Dylan Lonergan. And I think that would be the ideal thing for BC. But who wins this battle is going to have a big impact on how good this football team is, guys.
Well, to your point, Brian, their schedule works out in a way that I think they should start Dylan Lonergan, even if he's, your established floor with what your team can be with Grayson James. I think that was shown in their points per game output once he took over as a starter. You know what I mean? They put up 28 against SMU, 37 against Syracuse. They put up 41 against North Carolina, 34 against Pittsburgh. The game against Nebraska in the Pinstripe Bowl was ugly. If you guys remember that, like everybody's jersey at the end of the game was like brown, and it was great. It was muddy, slippery. And we're also talking about a Nebraska defense that held Ohio State to 21 points on the road.
Right.
So it's not like they were going up against a bad defense that was just kind of
And you also pointed out the closeness of that SMU. It wasn't like they scored a bunch of garbage points late against SMU. Grayson James ran for a 20-yard touchdown to give them a third-quarter lead, and he also led them on a 10-play, 74-yard drive for a touchdown that made it a 31-28 game. And SMU scored a touchdown to put it away to win by 10 with a touchdown with less than 10 seconds left in the game.
Yep.
So, yeah, you were correct. They were a better football team, especially on offense, when he was their quarterback last year.
And that was just a guy playing point guard. That wasn't somebody with the upside of a kid like Dylan Lonergan. And if you're going to get his feet wet, you do it against Fordham. You do it on the road against Michigan State and on the road against Stanford, which, the road game against Michigan State we talked about is going to be tough. But if you play it out in the inverse and you let Grayson James start to then eventually let Dylan Lonergan take over, what game do you implement him in? On the road against Pitt? Home against Clemson, on the road against Louisville. Like
Trev, could you see them doing something where it's like they're going to play both of them the first 3 games to let Dylan get comfortable, and then maybe so they play Fordham, at Michigan State, at Stanford, then a bye, then you're home against Cal, maybe it's that Cal game where it's like, okay, now we're turning the reins over. Could you see something like that if they aren't quite ready to give Dillon the whole thing?
Absolutely.
I hate that, man. I don't mean to jump in. I hate the two quarterback thing.
Well,
I mean, I get it. I understand where you guys are coming from.
I think it depends on why you're doing it.
Okay.
If your thing is, listen, this is our guy. It's kind of like how Clemson did it with Trevor Lawrence in 2018. Like, he's our guy.
Yeah.
But we've got this veteran quarterback. We want to remove some of the pressure of this young, talented quarterback and say, we're gonna ease you into this thing. And then when you're ready, we're going to hand the reins over to you. That's kind of how I see it. I don't view it as like a 2 quarterback system per se.
Okay.
Like when Steve Spurrier was doing that with wasn't it like Rex Grossman and like Jesse Palmer or something like that? It was like Noah Brindise and some like
he did.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Felt like, yeah.
I'm saying is basically Grayson James is hold down the spot till you feel Dillon Lonergan's ready to take it over. If you're not sure he's ready to do that going into the season. And then the other thing too, I've said this before, is when you start a young quarterback and he struggles, you can wreck his confidence a little bit. And now you've got to turn to your veteran. Like, I'd rather maybe, like you said, is maybe Grayson starts, Dillon gets his role, and then eventually you bring him along, because we're talking about a guy in Dillon Lonergan, man, who has 8 career passes in his career, who's thrown for 35 career yards. Like that's my thing. So like, I'd be okay. I mean, it is Fordham, so maybe that factors into it, where it'd be different to playing Miami and A&M the first 2 games, or Texas in the first game, or Ohio State the first game. But Spartan Stadium in week 2 is not going to be an easy thing too. So like,
that I agree with. 100%.
That's where I'm saying is like, okay, it's more so you're playing 2 quarterbacks until your younger talented guys ready to take over.
Do you take the risk, I guess, of having your veteran, take those snaps in the first game and succeeding to a high level because it's Fordham, you know what I mean? And then, eventually he's going to be benched, and it's like,
if you're a smart coach, you don't care about him thriving against Fordham, because you know what went into that. That's like, dude, he was wide open receivers and they couldn't cover Lewis Bond, and they couldn't cover
from a locker room standpoint. Do you think that?
No, I think players get it too, because that's what I'm saying. He's going to play both of them in game 1.
Okay.
That's the whole thing. Is it's not
I got you.
Play Grayson James. He's the guy every snap. It's Grayson starts, and then series 3, you bring in Dillon. And then, he then gets to make his plays against Florida. That could be an option. The other option could be, if it's close, is you just start the more talented player. But what the where I'm coming from is, okay, Grayson James is not significantly, but definitely ahead of Dillon Lonergan to start camp. Just like Kelly Bryant was ahead of Trevor Lawrence for most of fall camp, and then but you knew that eventually he was going to be there. And that's where I'm coming from on it, Vince. It's not where Grayson James is your starter. He plays every snap until you have a big lead. You're playing both of them, because then you also have a standpoint of, you also want to make sure that you keep Grayson James engaged in case Dillon Lonergan isn't ready for prime time.
Right.
And so you could, the flip side is you start Dillon Lonergan, Grayson James is checked out, and now Dillon's not ready for prime time.
Yeah.
So that's why it's best of both worlds. And then if Grayson James lights the world on fire against Michigan State and Stanford, okay, you keep rolling with it. And then, or you could say, hey, look, this is working. We bring in Dillon every 3rd, 4th series. We're scoring points. It's like, he's an athletic kid, and we're rolling.
Yeah.
But the goal is eventually
I think you have to have
Dillon's
the right
ready to take it over.
The communication has to be very good with the head coach and the quarterback's coach. And, I think that's the key, right? Like, it's going to have to be very well handled, because I've seen coaches botch this thing.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? And it feels like that's what happens more often than not. And so that's the only thing that would worry me. It's nothing against Bill O'Brien or whoever they have as their quarterback coach. It's just, it's a very, you have to handle this properly. We're not only in the quarterback room, but also with the locker room, for that matter. I mean, and reps at practice and all of those things. So it's just it's a fine line to walk. It's tough.
Yeah. Agree.
So they do have,
the one good thing working for both quarterbacks.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, go ahead. No, you got it.
No, it was funny because we're both thinking it. So, but like, Vince is going to say they got really good pass catchers.
They do. And I believe this is one of the, again, this isn't a Notre Dame show, but this, one of the things we talked about when the corners was BC, and they're going to have some wide receivers that are going to match up, be a challenge for Notre Dame. So let's talk about those skill
Trev, this
guys.
is one of the best receiving corps in the ACC.
Yeah.
Just full stop. Obviously, Clemson's in a league of their own. But after that, BC, NC State, SMU, there's some teams in this and there's others. There's some teams in this conversation that you're like, there's a battle for who that next best receiving corps in the ACC is, and BC's in there. And you and I have had a lot of private and public conversations about our opinion of this Boston College receiving corps.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of talent, man. I mean, between Lewis Bond and Reed Harris, I think they're two receivers with very different skill sets that complement each other well. Yeah. And Lewis Bond is kind of like the 5'11", like a little shifty guy. Like he is the, I guess you call him like the Mekhi Lemon of their offense. And then you have the bigger bodied Reed Harris. I mean, he's 6'5", he's almost 230. He averaged 28.6 yards a catch last season. And his breakout last year came in the final games when they had a quarterback under center that was playing point guard. And we've seen what a player like Reed Harris can do when he has somebody that's willing to take downfield shots and lives within the system of Bill O'Brien's offense. I think they're poised for a really big year, but I'm with you, man. Not enough people are talking about this receiving corps in terms of its ranking in the ACC. I mean, right now, I think they're up there with Louisville. I think that they're up there with SMU and some of these other teams. I mean, it's a talented group, no doubt, and they're going to help out whoever starts at quarterback.
It is not a surprise, like at all, that Reed Harris had his breakout after Thomas Castellanos was benched. It's not a surprise at all.
No.
In the first, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in the first 10 games of the season, 9 games of the season, Reed Harris had 5 catches on the season.
Mm-hmm.
He had 1 catch against Florida State. He had 1 catch against Duquesne. He had 1 catch against Missouri. Now, the 1 catch against Duquesne went for 72 yards, and the 1 catch against Missouri went for 67. He had 1 catch against Virginia, 1 catch against Florida State or Virginia Tech. Those catches went for 27 and 46 yards. He had 5 catches that went for 222 yards and 2 touchdowns. But it's just like late in game, or, it wasn't like he wasn't a focal point. Then he goes 0 catches against Louisville, 0 catches against Syracuse. In the last 4 games, let's just go 3 regular season games, because the BC game, he had 2 for 25 against Nebraska. That was an ugly game. You weren't throwing a whole lot in that game. The last 3 regular season games, he goes 4 for 78 against North Carolina. He goes 3 for 85 against Pittsburgh and has a touchdown. He goes 4 for 78 against SMU. He goes 3 for 76 and a touchdown against North Carolina. And then he goes 3 for 85 and a touchdown against Pitt. And so he was not only making big plays, he was still making the big plays, but he was also started making like more plays. And that offense looked so much different because Lewis Bond was still doing his thing. But when they started getting him more involved, you want to know why they scored 41 points against North Carolina, on top of the fact North Carolina was very good. But they had 9 catches for 81 yards for Lewis Bond, 3 catches for 76 yards and a touchdown for Reed Harris. Like, that's what it was. It was you had legit playmakers at receiver. And they were such a different team when those guys were put in the game. Such a different team when they were put in the game. And Jaden Skeet is a guy that caught 18 passes last year. This is a team in BC that I say that their receiving core, they did lose Morales, a tight end, but they bring back Jeremiah Franklin this season, a tight end who also had production last year in the pass game. So
whose production also took a step up when Grayson James took over as the starting quarterback.
He had 27 catches for 311 yards and 3 touchdowns, Trev. And you are absolutely correct. In the last 4 games 27 catches on the season in the last 4 games with Grayson James at quarterback, he had 15 of his 27 catches in 4 games. Correct. That's a great observation. That's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence in twofold. One, quarterback that fit the system better, so the pass game worked better. And then two, it's not a coincidence. A lot of these guys had their best production late anyway because more time in the system. So they've got weapons, and their running backs catch the ball out of the backfield as well. That's another part of it. So there's a lot to like about the skill talent that they have this year. I mean, look, Trayshawn Ward was their starting running back last year. He had 15 catches for 268 yards. They have a kid named Turbo Richard, who is a great name, by the way. He's going to be their lead back this year. I like him. I like him quite a bit. So, but he was more of a runner last year. 55 carries, 278 yards. I expect him to be the number one this year. They have Jordan McDonald last year as another good back. Those guys are going to be good running backs, but they're going to also be part of the pass game as well. Their running backs had around 30 catches last year also. So I really like what BC's offense has skill-wise. So whoever steps in at quarterback's not going to be thrown to he's going to be walking in a good situation, in my opinion.
From a skill position standpoint,
yes.
The other part of the walking into the situation is, will you be walking when the game? No, I'm just kidding. But so that's the best O-line joke I've got at the moment. But the O-line is a question mark coming into this, and when you have a guy that only has 4 starts in front of him and then no starts in front of him, you would like to have a better offensive line, and I think that's not. It's a question mark going in, I believe, fellas.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you go and you look at the makeup of what their projected starting offensive line is going to be. Left side is relatively held down. Jude Bowery comes back at left tackle. Logan Taylor comes back at left guard. But really, from center over, it starts to become a question mark. You look at their center. They bring in Matheson. He's a Princeton transfer. I think he was second team All Ivy League last year. He played over 600 snaps last year. So he has experience, but again, it's that level. It's how do you go from Ivy League football to now the ACC, where you're going up now in this season against Notre Dame, Clemson, Georgia Tech, SMU. There's a jump there. He has experience, but the Ivy League also played in less games. He started all 10 of those games for Princeton last year. Again, it's that levels conversation, and how is that going to translate over? At right guard, Dwayne Allen steps in. Now, he played in a lot of games last year. He started 3, including the bowl game against Nebraska in the Pinstripe Bowl. But he is, for all intents and purposes, a new starter stepping in. Can he handle the full workload of being the starting right guard at Boston College? We'll see. And then right tackle, Ryan McCow, he's the most inexperienced, excuse me. He only played 88 snaps in 2024. I believe it was across 5 games, all of it in kind of mop-up duty type situations. So from center over, it's going to be a question mark. And I know they have some returning starters on the left side, but they ranked 97th in the country last season in sacks allowed. They allowed 32 sacks in 13 games. Then they ranked number 83 in the country last year in yards per carry, averaged a hair over 4 yards a carry. So the offensive line is going to play a big factor in this, in how this, how the skilled talent of this offense is going to be used to thrive.
All right, I think it can be very lazy at times, guys, to say, well, he was a mobile quarterback, so he saved them from sacks. Or the counter argument is people say, well, he was a mobile quarterback, but he walked into a bunch of sacks. Both can be true for a quarterback. In the case of Thomas Castellanos, I truly believe that he was a guy that generated sacks. Like the way he performed last season, I felt like he ran himself into sacks last season, and he would make bad decisions last season, in my opinion. And then like I said, the offensive line also had its fair share of issues. What I do like about the new guys is they're all bigger kids. They're all over 300. I think Alex Alex over 300 pounds as well. Dwight Alex. So he's over 300 pounds as well. But I did think that they were solid in pass pro last year when Grayson James took over. They gave up 3 sacks to Pitt, but they weren't bad. I thought overall they were decent in that game. But you are correct, Trev. That's the part that's going to have to perform. They're going to have to step up and say, hey, look, we can keep this quarterback healthy. Their run game numbers were also a little bit misleading. They were 4.1 yards per carry, but Kyle Robichaud, their leading rusher last year. I said Trayshawn Ward. He was probably their best runner, but Kyle Robichaud is their leading rusher in attempts and stats or yards. He only averaged 4.3 yards per carry. And he was a Western Kentucky transfer. He wasn't overly productive. But if you look at their other backs, Trayshawn Ward averaged 5.3 yards a carry. He's gone also. But Jordan McDonald comes back. He was at 6.8 yards per carry. Turbo Richard comes back. He was at 5.1 yards per carry. For all the athleticism that Thomas Castellanos has, and while I agree that Bill O'Brien did a nice job of fitting the pass offense to fit him, he didn't fit the run offense for him because only ran for like 200 yards last season. But the pass offense, he adapted to Thomas Castellanos. He didn't adapt the rushing offense to Thomas Castellanos. And I think that was a mistake if he was going to be your guy. But when you look at the running backs coming back, though, Trev, there's yards per rushing production there, and I think that area is going to have to get better, going to have to get more consistent. But I think a more effective pass game and a more in rhythm pass game is going to help the run game a lot. But I do like their two backs. Jordan McDonald and Turbo Richard are good backs. So I think that's going to help them. They have a little bit more athleticism at running back in their number one role this year than they had last year.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Kai Robichaud was a good running back, but I mean, at the end of the day, he's just he was a little too stiff, doesn't have the athleticism of what these two guys coming back have. So I agree with you. I agree with you completely. But a lot's going to fall on the shoulders of the offensive line. Could not agree more. Let's switch over, Brian, to the defensive side of the ball, because that is going to be another question with this group. You know, you go through and you look, and last season they had some moments. You know, I don't think final score completely, indicates how well they played last year. When you go back and look at the final score of their games, I mean, they held Missouri to under 30. They held Virginia to under 30. But again, it's then towards the end of the season, you kind of started to see a little bit of it. SMU put up 38. Pitt put up 23, and it was a really injured Pitt team. Virginia Tech put up 42. Louisville put up 31. And so the name of the game for their defense is they just have to be a more consistent unit this year. They had some individual players put up some really gaudy numbers, but consistency.
Doing that without their edge player, their defensive end who had 20.5 tackles for loss and 16.5 sacks, 15 more hurries, 3 forced fumbles is going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Like, you weren't a very good defense with him.
Yeah.
How, are you going to be able to get better without him? I think that's I think I'll say this, Trev. I think the offense is going to be better this year. I'm confident in saying that the offense is going to be better this year. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
Absolutely agree.
The side of the ball that I have the most concerns about is defense. Because when you look at what they've got coming back, I do like the Quintavious Hutchins kid. I think he's got some tools. He had 13 hits plus sacks on the quarterback last year. It's pretty good. I really like their linebacker core that they have coming back. Their secondary might have one of the better safety tandems in the ACC, especially in the run game. Their cornerback tandem comes back. It's the D-line that's the big question mark. They actually have a lot coming back. I mean, you've got 4 starters coming back in the secondary and 2 of your 3 starters coming back in linebacker in your 3-3-5 alignment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is actually kind of funny. Did you ever notice this, Trevor? Am I counting this right? In Athlon Sports, they only list 10 starters for BC. Did you ever notice that? 3 D linemen,
no.
3 linebackers, and 4 DBs. But I just noticed that in there. But what they do up front is going to be the key to this team, because they're a 4-down team. They're a 4-2-5 team. How they perform up front with some new faces is going to determine how good they are, because as you said, their offense is going to be better. It's still not an offense that I want to get into shootouts with every week. It's not a game you're like, okay, first 1 to 40 wins. That's the offense won't be that. And this is my concern in this game. And that's something that I felt hurt them last year, was the fact that their defense did put them in some of those situations where, you do get ripped up by Virginia Tech. I mean, Virginia Tech rushing for 368 yards on you, and going for 42 points and 532 yards and 9.2 yards of play is a borderline like, okay, did I make the right hire here? I mean, that's a pretty rough performance.
Yeah.
You have to do better. You're giving up 6 yards of play to Missouri. Okay, I get it. But you even let Florida State throw the ball on you. Couldn't run it on you, but you let them throw it on you. SMU put up good numbers on you. And so their run defense got a lot better second half of the year, numbers-wise. Part of me wonders, is that because teams weren't good running the ball, they were good rushing the ball, or teams were more willing to throw it on them? That's a question mark. That's a question that we're going to have to find out. So I'm very curious to see that. Like, was their run defense that good, or was it teams just didn't try to run on them because they saw obvious holes in the pass defense? Because I don't know how else you can kind of say, okay, well, yeah, they ranked here, they ranked there, but I'm like, yeah, but any team that like tried to run on them had decent success running on them for the most part. I mean, they did a nice job against Louisville, but got ripped up by Virginia Tech. I mean, it was a weird run defense when you watch them play. There were times where I'm like, this run defense is pretty good, and there's other times you didn't. The problem is 3 of their 4 starters on the D line that played a role in that, including their stud edge, are gone. How good's the new line going to be? But I do like their linebackers, and I do like their secondary potential this year. They got to play to their potential, and that's going to be a key. And can their safeties cover as well as they defend the run? That's the other question that I have.
No, absolutely. I mean, and their schedule is not going to do them any favors. That is one of my reservations about this team. And what kind of jump are they going to take? It might be relative to, how big of a jump can their offense make to kind of make up for the question marks on their defense. And they're going up against some really good offenses this year. Week 2, they're on the road against Michigan State and Adon Shuler and what we believe to be a very underrated receiving core in the Big Ten in Michigan State. They follow that up. They're on the road against Pitt, who, if Eli Holston can stay healthy, I'm very high on them this year. Then they're at home against Clemson. I think, their offense kind of speaks for themselves and what they bring back. On the road against Louisville, who has one of the best backfields in the country. Miller Moss is back. They return a host of wide receivers. They're at home against Notre Dame. They're at home against SMU, and then Georgia Tech, who returns Haynes King and Jamal Haynes. And then they're on the road at Syracuse. And I know they were able to beat them and upset them last year. I don't really know what Syracuse's offense is going to be, but I can guarantee you by the last game of the regular season, we're going to know what that offense is going to be about. And so their schedule
here's the question I have on defense too is that was one of the more strange, I'll just say it, strange hires that I saw last offseason. This is going to 2024 because he hired Tim Lewis. And Tim Lewis, I mean, we know who Tim Lewis was. He was played in the NFL for a while back in the 80s. He was a longtime assistant coach in the NFL. So from 1995 until 2015, he was coaching the NFL. And then he went and spent 2 years as a defensive coordinator at a high school in North Carolina. Then from 2019 to 2023, he was coaching in the UFL. And then gets hired as Boston College's coordinator last year. You say, okay, either this is a bad hire, or B, this is a hire that's going to work out, but he also needed a year to get back into the speed of coaching in college. I mean, I think that's a fair thing to say. So
yeah,
I don't know what the answer is to that. It's either going to be a outside the box move that is going to be as costly for BC as it was for Notre Dame with Brian Van Gorder, although Tim Lewis last year was not as bad as Brian Van Gorder. He wasn't even bad. It wasn't good enough. And like I say, making that clear. But now that the other counter is that, okay, now teams have an idea of what you're doing. He does some funky stuff and some unorthodox stuff schematically. And so that kind of led to them being a team that at times would be out of position and not give up big plays, or would give up big plays. But they weren't terrible at giving up big plays. They were top 30 team last year and fewest plays allowed of over 30 yards. But they would have some things where I don't quite understand like what you're trying to do here. And it just allowed teams to kind of just, pick them apart throwing the football. But they weren't terrible. And you look at the numbers on the season, I mean, they held teams to 23.8 points per game. That's good. Well, that's because you held Florida State's terrible offense at 13. You held Duquesne to nothing. You held Virginia Tech to 24. But then you go back and look at like as teams got more comfortable or had more film of what a guy who'd been in the UFL for half a decade was doing, that's when they started struggling. And, it's kind of the opposite of what we talked about in the offense. If you look at the last, 7 games of the year, they gave up 29.4 points per game last 7 games of the year. So that the defense actually was worse the second half of the year than they were the first half of the year. Now he's in more of a, okay, you have a year under your belt. This is what college football is all about. You've got some kids coming back on the second and third levels. Can you show improvement? That's going to define BC season. If Tim Lewis can get the defense going, and I'm not saying he is a good or a bad hire. I'm saying I don't know. I think that's the question mark. But if he can kind of show improvement, be more consistent, that's how BC surprises people and goes 8-4. 9-3 is going to be tough because when you at Michigan State, at Pitt, home against Clemson, at Louisville, home against Notre Dame, home against SMU, home against Georgia Tech, that's a real tough 7 games. If you go 4-3 against that stretch, that's a heck of a season. And you're 9-3, but that means you also beat, Syracuse on the road. It means you beat UConn. It means, that's not going to be easy. But if they're going to be 7-8 win team, I think it's going to be because their defense performs better. But if they are 9 or more, it means that their defense took a big jump. But I think this is the side of the ball that ultimately is going to determine how good BC is going to be this year. Because I just have a level of confidence in their offense because I like the talent better on offense. And there's just more of a proven track record with Bill O'Brien. There's not as much of a proven track record with Tim Lewis. He's going to have to establish one. And if he establishes a good one this season, then this is a sneaky good ACC team if he can get the defense going.
Well, let's kind of tie a bow on this then, Brian, and let's talk season predictions for Boston College. And let's break down a little bit of their schedule. We've talked about some of the opponents that they have. What are some of their biggest games and some of their toughest stretches that they're going to have to go through this season?
Well, to me, Trev, there's 2 parts of it. Number one is that early Michigan State game. Yep. That's going to be huge. That's a big one. You've got back-to-back games in October. So the start of the 2 months that they have are tough. Their first 2 games of September are not easy gimmies. Their first 2 games of October and then their first 2 games of November are really hard. But I think you've got to, between Michigan State, Pitt, and Clemson, you've got to win at least one of them. If you can somehow sneak out 2 of them without having any corresponding bad losses, you can save your season, because once you get to that last 5 games, that's a brutal stretch. And if you go into that last 5 games, so it's at Louisville, home against Notre Dame, home against SMU, home against Georgia Tech, at Syracuse. If you go into that stretch with 3 to 4 losses, you're probably not going to make a bowl game. You've got to be, in my opinion, no worse than 5-2 going into the Louisville game. If you're 5-2 going in the Louisville game and you just need to win one of those last 5 games. If you win 2 of those last 5 games, you've matched your record from last year. Now that's a pretty good season when you consider, like we've talked about, the difficulty of the schedule compared to last year's schedule. If they had last year's schedule, Trevor, let's pull up last year's schedule again. If this season's schedule was at Florida State, home against Duquesne, at Missouri, home against Michigan State, home against Western Kentucky, at Virginia Tech, home against Louisville, home against Syracuse, at SMU, home against North Carolina, home against Pitt, I'm like, okay, you need to be minimum 7-5, probably need to be 8-4. But now this year it's like you drop Florida State and you replace them with Notre Dame. Or let's just say in league, Clemson. You get rid of Florida State, you add Clemson. You get rid of Missouri and you add Notre Dame. Like that's you get rid of Virginia Tech and you add Georgia Tech. Like that's not easy either. You get rid of North Carolina and you add what it'd be. Trying to look at another ACC team that played last year. Stanford, that's the only step down. And then you still play Michigan State, but now you got to play Michigan State at home. You still play Pitt, who you beat last year, but now you got to play them on the road. You played them at home last year, now you got to play them in the road. And you beat Syracuse last year. So like 3 of the 4 teams they played last year, they beat. But they beat them all at home. And I almost think their home schedule is kind of what screws them over. I'd almost rather play Clemson, Notre Dame, SMU on the road than at home. But I would say this, if they have to have one huge upset this season. Between Clemson, Louisville, Notre Dame, SMU, you have to pull off an upset in one of those games. I think that's the other thing when I evaluate their schedule. And you said earlier, Trev, hold serve at home and improve on the road, I think are the keys for them this season. So that's their schedule, Trev. Let's now wrap up with our actual record prediction, and I'll let you start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have Boston College this year going. I have Boston College this year going 7-5 in the regular season, but I do think they win their bowl game to get to 8-5. And I know not a lot of people are going to. It's not going to look like a big dramatic jump because the regular season record is going to mirror what it was last year. But given the difficulty of their schedule, I do believe that this is going to be a better football team than what it was last year. I just think that there's going to be some teams that they just can't get over the hump with. Yeah. You know, I have them losing to Pitt, Clemson, Notre Dame, SMU, and Georgia Tech.
Okay. But
I also have them beating Michigan State on the road. I have them beating Syracuse on the road to wrap up their regular season. And I do think in some of their losses, it's going to be competitive, but I just have a little bit too many questions about their defense in some games where I think it could be closer. I think the Georgia Tech game could end up being closer, even though that they lose. I think the SMU game, similar to last year, could be closer. But I think when it comes down to it, to your point, Brian, I don't know if this is an offense yet that I would be comfortable in a shootout. However, it would not surprise me if games like an SMU or a Georgia Tech or even a Pitt, if it ends up being a shootout, we know a little bit more about this offensive identity for this team, that they come into their own a little bit and they are able to pull off a win. But right now I have them at 7-5 and then 8-5 with a bowl win.
I have them at 6-6 because I just think that schedule is too hard. I have them losing. Definitely, I have them losing to Clemson, Louisville on the road, and Notre Dame. Like, those are 3 definite losses. Then it's between at Michigan State, at Pitt. There's a better chance you lose both of those than you win both of those. And I also like this Pitt team. But those 2 games on the road, you've got SMU, Georgia Tech at home, and then at Syracuse. At Michigan State, at Pitt, home against SMU, home against Georgia Tech, at Syracuse. I don't have a lot of confidence they go 3-2 against that schedule to go 7-5. And then you've got to hope that you don't have any stub your toe moments like against Cal or Stanford or UConn, who's a 9-win team last year. So I have them at 6-6 right now with the definite losses to Clemson, Louisville, Notre Dame. If they can pull off, if they can be a really good home team and maybe, knock off SMU and Georgia Tech, or at least one of them, then you have a shot to go 7-5, 8-4. But I think their game at Michigan State in week 2 is going to determine whether or not they can be an 8-win football team. Because based on what you said, you have them winning that game. Based on what you said you had them losing to Pitt, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Louisville. Who'd you say you had them losing to?
SMU and Georgia Tech.
SMU and Georgia Tech. So you have them beating Louisville on the road.
Upset Louisville on the road.
And you have beaten Michigan State on the road.
Mm-hmm.
If they beat Michigan State on the road in week 2, this team will absolutely have a shot to be an 8-win football team. To your point, that is, to me, the first huge game they play next season. I don't have them winning that game, which is why I then have them go. And I think Louisville's a definite loss for them. But that's going to be a game we learn a lot about this team in week 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to learn a lot about both of those teams, BC and Michigan State, in week 2.
Yep.
And I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. But that game will determine whether your 8-win record did you say 7-5 and then
7-5 and then the bowl game would get them to 8 wins.
Yeah. Them getting to 7-8 wins is going to be determined by whether or not they can win that game in week 2. Because if they beat Michigan State, they could go on the road and get upset the next week against Stanford. I would worry about like a trap game type of thing, but I think there's enough offensive firepower on this team where they just kind of out talent Stanford there. You come out of the bye week 3-0 home against Cal. Now you're starting to build some confidence. Yeah. And that's how this team can maybe roll a little bit and pull off a couple of those upsets that we're talking about. But I think if they lose to Michigan State, I think it makes it a lot harder for them to be a 7-8 win football team. So that's where I'm at. So good one. Good stuff. That's our BC preview. Kenny Moore, appreciate your super chat, man. We appreciate that very much. That's going to do it for us. If you guys want to get more of Trevor, wait about an hour. Trevor's going to be joining the show tonight on IB Nation Sports Beat, which begins at 5 o'clock. I don't think you'll be on there right at the beginning. Is he going to have Pat Garrity on at the beginning?
Pat Garrity has an interview.
That's right. So that'll be awesome. And then obviously Trev will then join the show after that and talk some Notre Dame football and some other topics. So you can have him there. You and I will be back. Trevor and I will be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock for our Buy Sell Hold show. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then Thursday, we're going to have some fun Notre Dame topics. We've wrapped up our position previews now. We obviously will continue our opponent previews going into next week, but a lot more Notre Dame talk to discuss. So for Trev, I'm Brian, folks. After you hit that like button, you can go take a little break, get ready for IB Nation Sports Beat tonight at 5 o'clock. But thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you all very much. Have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll catch you again tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.